Oh, okay, all right. Well, I'd like to open the December 22nd Freeport Planning Review Board meeting, and start with information exchange.
Okay, so first thing, we have a staff approval. I don't have the graphic yet because it's now into permitting processing, but I'll show it to you next month. I did sign off on staff approval for design changes to a sign for Meeting House Arts in the church at 40 Main Street. They previously had approval for a sign there, so it's just a replacement. The planning board, this coming month, we'll be talking, for number 2, we'll be talking about some updates to the subdivision ordinance. They're going to be looking at some just general cleanup throughout the subdivision ordinance. We have a couple standards missing. There's some outdated references. There's some things that don't reflect this board's current practice. So they're going to have a first introduction. I think what we'll do at the next meeting is put it on there for you guys to look at. As you guys are reviewing your ordinances and working with them, if you've noted things over time in the subdivision ordinance, we're not looking to make substantial changes. This is just like a baseline round of cleanup. But if there's stuff in there that you've noticed that needs to be cleaned up, send me an email because I'd love to incorporate it at this round of changes. They will also be talking about parking. It recently came up that a parking lot, standalone parking lot's not actually a permitted use in the Village Commercial 1 zone, which is the downtown. We have a lot of standalone parking lots, so it makes them all
I'm sorry, what kind of parking lot?
standalone, where you just have a parking lot on a lot with no other use.
Oh, sorry.
They're not permitted uses, thereby they're viewed as non-conforming uses, and it does set some limitations if people want to make changes to those lots or repurpose portions of them. So the planning board's going to be looking at that for discussion. They did make recommendation to the council for some changes to the site plan review section of the ordinance. We discussed those a couple months ago, and you guys gave input on things like what should go to staff reviews, how we should handle signage, and some different review thresholds. That will most likely go to the council in January. And finally, they just wrapped up their language on cannabis. They made a recommendation to the council to add the uses of cannabis manufacturing and processing facility and cultivation. So the council will be taking that up at some point in time. They also need to work on a licensing ordinance, so that will continue at the council level. Number 3, Downtown Vision Task Force Implementation Group. The group presented to the town council a list of about 20 combined goals and projects that were identified as priorities. If you missed that, you can watch the council meeting online. Also, if you go to the planning department page on the website, click on the link on the side for Downtown Vision, you can see a link to the PowerPoint presentation to see what projects and goals made the list. They were accepted by the council, so now the next step will kind of be to get an action plan with involved parties to how to move forward and implement those ideas and potentially flag funding requests for some of the different projects that are there. And then finally, number 4, the town of Freeport recently applied to the state of Maine for a community resilience grant. We made application with the town of Yarmouth for funding of a sustainability coordinator that would be shared between the 2 municipalities. That grant was conditionally awarded. We have to submit more information, but we expect to get a final confirmation of that in January. Probably in the next week or so, we're going to post a job opening for a sustainability coordinator that will be an employee of the planning department. That person's main duties will be, for the next year, assisting GPCOG quite heavily in the development of a climate action plan for the town of Freeport, which is already underway. One more planning thing going on, and I'm going to try to report to you monthly, just in case you're interested, so you'll know where we're at in the process if you want to get involved. And that's what I have for you under Info Exchange.
Really smart to share a resource like that, because it makes it more affordable for both towns. Right.
Yeah, we're really excited. Freeport and Yarmouth are alike in a lot of ways. We're both unique and individual, but as far as some of our community assets and where we're at in the climate action planning process, we're very similar. So we think there can be some efficiencies and some great opportunities to work together on some public outreach and education. So we're excited.
Any other questions for Caroline? Okay. Then we will, thank you. Then we will start, let's see, a review of the minutes for October 19th.
do have a quorum here tonight for that
The
one.
19th, I was just checking. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay.
Then you'd need to table November 16th because you don't
Okay.
have a quorum here tonight.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, then we will, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes of October 19th? We can just do,
And,
yep,
yes? Yeah.
okay. Unanimous?
Well, I'm.
You
I feel
recused.
abstain.
Yes. Yep. All right. And as Caroline stated, we'll have to table the November minutes. That brings us to item 3, tabled items, American Eagle signage.
So this is the same submission as last month. Last month, there wasn't anyone present to represent the application. Tonight on Zoom, you have Courtney from SB Signs who's representing the application. Many of these were replacement signs, but some of them were new signs since they're in design review. It's not something I have any staff approval ability for. You had the submission in your packet from the last meeting. You also had it in your digital packet this month. If you want, Courtney is here. She can walk you through what they're proposing and what's new versus replacement. Or if you don't have questions, that's fine too.
I wasn't here last
Nor
month,
nor
so.
was I, so.
Yeah, so last month, nobody was here, so the board did not get into the details of the application. There wasn't a presentation. They didn't discuss it. They just
Okay.
tabled it to today.
It would be helpful if we could get an overview.
You want
Caroline,
to
would you like
screen
to do
share?
that, or would you like me to?
Nope, that would be for you to do. I think you should be able to screen share too if you have graphics that you want to put up for them.
I do not. Does everybody have the packet?
That's what I'm looking for.
It was in last.
You had it in the last packet or you had it in the digital packet? You want me to put the packet, the drawings up on screen for you?
Yeah, if
and
you
Courtney
wouldn't
can
mind. Sorry.
walk you through?
Just let me know when you're ready.
Hey, Courtney, can you see the screen?
I can, yep. Do you want to change it to the second page? So the general overview, American Eagle has had a logo change, and so this is just updating their logo. There's the S1 and S2 are on, I believe, what is the north side of the building, and S3 and S4 are the west side. Caroline, can you move to the next page? Perfect. So on the left, you'll see the current images or the current signs that they have on the building. They have the eagle above the clock on the top of the sort of tower section, and then their entire logo, American Eagle Outfitters, along the left-hand side. So what they're proposing is to remove both of those existing signs, and where the American Eagle Outfitters is, will now have the Aerie logo. And then on the right-hand side of that, they're proposing removing the eagle completely, and that sign will be taken with the American Eagle text only on the lower right side portion. And that is where the lights are being added. The light fixtures, I believe that you should have in your packet the specs on those, but the landlord is installing those, or the property owner. And the intention is that they'll be the same fixtures that are on the left side of the building. And then if you move to the back of the building, again, their previous logo said American Eagle Outfitters. They've changed their font, dropped the Outfitters, and they're adding that to the back as well as some lights. And those are the only locations. Oh, I'm sorry. You can't see it in the previous one. Sorry, the word Aerie is also there to the right on that same west elevation,
Kind of behind the tree.
behind the tree.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant?
Just to clarify, is this one store or two stores?
It's one store. It's like, I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar like with Gap and Gap Body. It's one store. They have the Body line and the Gap. This is the Aerie line and American Eagle. So it's American Eagle Aerie is their brand.
Okay, thank you.
2 in 1.
It's appeared that there's lights being added. Are there currently lights over the existing sign?
Yes.
Sure.
It's the same gooseneck light structure. It's I sent in the specs that the landlord provided us for the light fixtures that they'll be installing, and as we understand it, they're to match the existing gooseneck lights on the other parts of the building.
I'll just put that on screen so you can see it. It's standard gooseneck shining down over the signs.
And so the letter sets themselves are just a black metal letter, no illumination other than the gooseneck lights.
And currently, the sign is illuminated, and as renovated, the sign will be illuminated.
Yep, external illumination.
Any other questions? Are there any questions from the public? Anybody online?
You do not have any hands up online.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion. Do I have to read the whole thing now? I don't.
No, because we're not online.
We're all here.
Okay. So I make a motion to approve the proposal of, what's their name? Who are they? SB Signs?
Would that be us? Yeah.
SB Signs, yeah. As written. Is that good enough?
In the staff report.
And the staff report.
Okay. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much. And with that, we will move to item 4, our reviews, starting with 4 Kendall Lane for design review certificate. Caroline.
Sure, so this is a residential structure on Kendall Lane. The applicant is proposing to add a ramp for accessibility to the existing front entrance. There was a picture before you tonight. They will be removing the concrete stairs that are there, and they will be putting a ramp in along the front of the building connecting to the existing walkway. One of the things noted in the staff report, and that you might have noted on the plot plan, is that this parcel is in the Resource Protection 2 zone because it's in the area of aquifer recharge. It has a minimum lot size of 2.5 acres and the standard setbacks of 50 feet on the front and side and 75 feet on the rear. There's also coverage limitations due to the timing on the creation of some of the lots in the Kendall Lane area and the zoning. Many of these lots are legally non-conforming. In this case, I just want to note the applicant is required to get design review because they are located within the design review district. Because they don't meet setbacks, if approval is granted, they do intend to apply to the code officer under the standards of section 601 of the ordinance for a disability structures permit, which is clearly outlined as something the code officer has the ability to grant if there's someone that is residing in the property that needs access. So that will be why the plan reflects a smaller setback than the zoning shows, because that's the next step. As step 1, they had to get design review before they can go through that permitting process. Just FYI, just to point out why the setbacks might not be met. Details on the ramp are included in your packet. It's standard metal ramp, kind of L-shaped. And Curtis Hamilton is here. If you guys have questions, he's happy to answer questions for you on the submission.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the board?
I guess just one basic question. How high from the grade does the ramp need to go in order to enter the building? Okay.
We just need him to go to the podium if you guys have questions so that they can pick you up on TV.
The total elevation is 11 inches.
Is this does this ramp constitute like a permanent fixture to the property? In other words, if it were to be,
It can be removed.
it couldn't be removed.
It can be
It can't be
removed.
removed.
Any other questions? Okay, are there any questions from the public? Online?
There are no hands up online.
Okay, if there's no further comment or questions, entertain a motion.
So moved.
Somebody will need to look at the submission and add a date on the application.
Okay, wait, let me just find this.
I think it might be it was sent via email or the digital packet. I can look it up here.
The date for the submission?
The date on the application is needed for the motion. Let me pull it up here.
Oh, okay.
If someone wants to make a motion, the date would be 12/16/22.
I so move that the applicant who filed their, what do you call it? Who filed for approval of a front entrance aluminum steel ramp on 12/16/22
4 Kendall Square.
for
For
4 Kendall
Kendall Lane.
Lane. I so move that that be approved.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll do it. I'll second.
Okay, Linda, thank you. All those in favor?
Could we, before voting, could we
Yes.
briefly have a discussion on the motion? I'd like to note that, I don't have, like, strongly support this motion, and I recognize the need for that accommodation. But I think I want to just observe that in any other context, if it's here for the kind of historic design review, in any other context outside of an ADA accessibility, it likely wouldn't satisfy our historic design review test, right? That doesn't mean that, of course, like, that the accommodation is necessary. We're certainly going to approve and accommodate that accommodation. It's essential for the people that live there. But I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that the historic design review currently identifies an exception. If it doesn't, it should. We should have a basis that this is an exception, it has to be approved. I have an inherent concern that if, you approve this without a specific exception, in the future, someone says, oh, well, I want to put, these kind of like steel features in front of the property that otherwise would be unacceptable for historical design based on the fact, well, that was deemed okay then. But it's, of course, it's done for a very particular purpose here. And I say that only to note that I truly I don't intend on opposing the motion, and voting for it, but I'm concerned about what it means, given that we're not approving it under an exception, we're approving it under.
So I think what I'm hearing is that this is another item to add to the list for updating the ordinances.
I think so, and, I'm afraid that any other kind of condition on it would probably be inappropriate, and so I'm not suggesting any other condition other than maybe noting for our discussion and for the record that, the basis of this approval is based on accommodating a need and not, recognizing that need supersedes some of the design review issues.
Okay. Caroline, is that something that you can, do you have a list of?
Yeah, I do have a list. So this is subject to design review. It is a Class C structure, and you do have to review it under the current standards. We don't have an exemption. We're seeing a lot more of these accessibility ramps going in. One of the things I strongly dislike is making people have to come through this process when there's a need. So it is something already flagged on the list that we need to look at. Also related to your question, kind of a sidetrack, but I think interesting to know, we don't acknowledge temporary structures, so we permit them as permanent structures. If the applicant gets approval tonight and does apply for the disability structures permit, that actually can be granted conditionally, that when the person no longer needing that accommodation leaves the property, that feature also goes away. Just a interesting fact. That's how they're granted quite often conditionally.
So is that something?
That's
that we would-
separate, that you guys have nothing to do with. I just note it because
Okay.
you asked that
Okay,
question.
so we can't make that a condition?
No, you cannot.
Does that procedure take more time, take more expense? Why is that not a preferable way of doing that than, presenting it to our random
Because we
discretion?
have not yet updated our design review standards to exempt it. So he needs to come through the process, and actually, the disability structures permit is not new to Maine, but it's new to Freeport. We hadn't had it in our standards until very recently.
Right, but it's available now.
It is available now.
So in order to avoid this kind of future concern, referring this application to now go through that channel is a possibility, and that could accommodate a permit being issued immediately
In the
on this
future.
project.
On other projects in the future, that's what you're saying, to get them out of design review.
And by immediately, I don't mean today. I know we can't do it, but they can come to planning tomorrow and complete that application and receive it.
If we exempt them from design review, we would have nothing to do with it, in the case of a residential structure. Until we update the design review ordinance, they're coming to you. Disability structures permit goes straight to the code officer, processed at the time of the building permit. You're thinking?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand the difference. If there's two different avenues of permits, why that other permit isn't available? If this board were to not take action in order to avoid muddying that water, why that permit isn't available?
It's available, but because they're in design review, he can't do anything to the exterior of that facade that's visible from the right-of-way without getting design review approval from you first, under the current ordinance.
It seems like it's in conflict. It's a chicken or the egg problem.
Yes, and we have design review update already flagged with the accommodating features to be addressed
Okay.
in the ordinance.
Sounds like we have some ordinance reorganization that is necessary.
We have a lot of
Yes.
reorganization
Yes.
that's necessary.
Is there a possibility of waivers requesting on these design review things?
No, they would need to show that they meet the standards for the Class C structure,
I think
as
one
with
of,
any of the other ramps that you have also issued recently.
I think what this application has going for it relative to the design review standard is scale. It's very low profile, not much rise. If it was like 42 inches, it would be a whole different animal that I think would draw more scrutiny just because of the nature of the aluminum, pre-manufactured arrangement versus something site-built, site-specific, which on a larger scale would be more appropriate to be site-specific.
Any other discussion? Okay. With that, all those in favor?
Was it seconded? It was.
Yes.
Yeah, Lynn, Linda, whether the move in second.
Okay, unanimous? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item is Castronovo, McGranzer Way, shoreland stabilization.
Okay, so you guys are going to be really efficient at shoreline stabilizations really quickly here. So we had a discussion a couple meetings ago about learning as we go with this new process and the standards, and maybe some things we could do differently, and try to improve some things that we're doing. So two things that I did with this one is I had it reviewed up front by the code officer, and his memo was attached to the staff report, just like we do with other department heads. He gave you detailed comments. Jim had also raised concern, or just to flag, it would be really great if, we have a general condition to make sure that everybody's aware that can be outside. There could be outside permits that also need to be issued with these applications. Our code officer already does that on any of the shoreline permits that he issued, so I got some language from him, so we're all being consistent. This application, you got the materials in your packet, you got the initial staff report The applicant's proposing to stabilize about 60 feet of shoreline using riprap and some boulders at the bottom. 40 feet were previously stabilized. You had an old DEP permit in your file. This new project does require Army Corps permits and DEP permits, for which they have filed. Those are independent, but again, we did add a general condition to kind of put people on guard that those are required. They have stated that there will not be any vegetation removal for this project. That was one of the items we were waiting for clarification on, which is why you did not have draft findings in your packet and you had them before you tonight. The other thing is the applicant for shoreline stabilization, the standard requires that them to access the site from the water unless they demonstrate otherwise why they need to access it from the land. I was able to clarify today that they will not be removing vegetation to access the site via land. They actually will be accessing the site via the water, so that's been incorporated in the findings before you tonight. The only thing missing from the application, they said that they'll follow DEP best management practices for erosion control. The ordinance does require that they submit a erosion control and sedimentation plan. Because they also are in the floodplain and need a flood permit from the code officer, there's a suggested condition of approval here that be submitted to be reviewed and approved by the code officer. They're gonna have to do it anyways as part of that flood permit. Otherwise, there's not any outstanding information. The applicant representative is here tonight if you have questions for Carter.
Would the applicant's representative like to say anything, add anything?
Caroline is private, correct.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board?
Has the DEP permit been issued?
Carter, you can go up there.
DEP permit is in process, and applied for.
All right. What was the application date? Is this the October 10, 2022?
Does it say in your packet?
Well, I mean, there was an application to the Historic Preservation Commission. That
That was part of the process, so that's part of the, I couldn't tell you what the date was. It's right in front of me. I could get that for you if you like, in time.
Is that in here?
The one in your packet was from the one done in the 90s, I believe, for the other 40 feet. Now they're doing about 60. As of last week, I was told that those had been filed, but they're not required to submit them, so they weren't included.
is there a survey that's been done?
There's no survey in fact.
Is that the boundary, the boundary inspection plan? This? One that says this is not a boundary survey?
It identifies the iron pins of the property.
But does that show the hat line?
My drawing does. The next page over shows the outline. Next page in the packet.
There, this one might be, this is in color.
I think I can see it.
You got it, okay.
Are there some, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are there some circumstantial issues that create problems by asking us to have the opportunity to revisit this after we have the findings from DEP on its permitting?
Run that by me again?
In other words, what would be the result of asking you to wait until you have a DEP permit So we can review that as part of our findings of what we need to establish
It's scheduled to be a winter project, and one of the worries is that we run out of time. We come into soft ground season, and vegetation start to regrow. So we're already pushing the limits at this state for it. And I'm looking for the date here for the NRPA permit. I'll hopefully come up with that date here in a second for you.
Jim, I'm sorry, I thought we've been through this discussion before where they are not able to do any work until they have all the permits in place. So in effect, our approval, if we were to approve this, is contingent on that permit being issued.
10/1/22 was the application in.
So then, what, is it 120 days? For the NRPA permit to be issued from application?
Yes, something like that. And reading through Freeport's application, I believe it's a standalone permit that you have, not contingent before the fact on other permits. Because if we wait for other permits to come out, nobody will make the first move, and we'll have gridlock. So if you're waiting for DEP to make their approval, it just gets into a deadlock. That's something that I've been finding in general places.
The concern that I expressed before is that we are, this is a brand-new aspect to our jurisdiction. You know, this is not a panel of experts in this area, whereas the DEP, which is reviewing, although different standards that overlap on the findings that we need to make in order to say that meets our town ordinance standards. I feel uncomfortable based on the information that's here, stating with definitive findings that those standards are satisfied, and would have tremendously greater comfort in breaching that finding in reliance on the comment and feedback and the findings of the DEP permit. And I think with that in mind, because construction won't happen until that permit is issued anyway, I would encourage this board again that we hold and kind of we can revisit it quickly, much like we did with this American Eagle application today. You know, just with the assurance that there's some findings by people that know what they're talking about before we just say, you know, we're not sure, but it seems good enough.
So are you saying that we would table it, and then once they have that permit fall into place, we would be the next meeting afterwards?
In other words, yeah, we'd be able to utilize to rely on the findings of the DEP in its permit to be able to be assured that the findings that we need to make to approve the permit are satisfied.
The duty of reviewing these state shoreland zoning findings, as we've discussed, come down to the board. We are struggling, as they are new, with the best way to do that and to get up to speed, and we've talked about exploring some other options. We don't have an ordinance requirement, and we've been advised by our legal counsel to not put that in here for these applications. We cannot rely on an outside agency to do the job that's designated to the board to review independently.
But I think we also, I think we do in many cases, as does the town council and other boards and commissions, rely on guidance from our staff, who does have much more of that expertise, Jim, that you're referring to. And in that sense, I do defer and rely on our staff for their comment and their review and their recommendations, their guidance.
You know, I had the same comment when we had some of these coming up earlier, and I thought we had somewhat agreed in some way or another that there was some wording that we added to the motion.
Yeah, I thought that was like what we try to do with the condition that you have on this one, to flag them that they have to get those things. Every applicant that comes before you, quite often they have independent things that they need to obtain for outside permits. It's their responsibility. Someone's got to go first, like Carter said, and if DEP flags something and Carter has to make a change, then Carter has to come back. But again, you guys can only review for your standards. So if he changes something, you're still looking at it under these standards you have before you tonight.
It's still a conflicting, in my mind, that if we were to approve this as is, and a month from now, and they start doing the work, because we've approved a permit, and then it comes back that there has to be something, let's just say in a different situation, totally changed. I'm not saying that this would have major changes, but we would not, the work would have already then been done, most likely, and how do you go back, and in case of shoreline work, how do you unstabilize what might have been stabilized improperly?
They would have an issue with the DEP if they start doing work without a permit. They have the municipal permit, but they don't have the approval from the other regulatory bodies that they need to obtain before they do work. So they should be waiting until they get all their ducks in a row. Otherwise, they could be in a violation situation with an outside agency, even if they're fine with the town of Freeport and you made your
Then why can't we
findings.
include something that states that work cannot proceed without the appropriate
So
permits
here,
from other agencies?
you have a draft condition on this one tonight that says in addition to the municipal shoreline zoning permit, the applicant must apply for and obtain all applicable permits for the proposed development under the NRPA, which is that DEP with the citation to state law, site location of development, the erosion and sedimentation control law, stormwater management, and federal clean waters as delegated to the state of Maine, and any other applicable state and federal laws regulating the use and development of the land. That's general language to flag a wide variety of outside agency permits. It's going to vary what permits any project gets from outside agencies based upon the scope of the work.
So can you not add the words that say the applicant must apply for, cannot start work until all applicable permits have been approved by any outside agencies?
I mean, you can, the only thing I kind of don't like about that, if we're working through it, is like, we're not going to go through all these agency permits and know what they need and what they don't. So then we have a situation where the code officer's enforcing this condition, but some of these are going to be easy, like we know that they're going to need NRPA from DEP, but others might not. And so then it puts this weird enforcement situation where like the code officer is going to have to determine if they need a permit from, DEP, and that's really not his job in this case. I definitely think we're working through these and trying to come up with a best practice and get us up to speed. And we've talked about exploring some other avenues if DEP would allow for review, but we're just not there yet.
My biggest concern is that work could get started on any of these permits that are going to come to us more and more. And if there is changes that the DEP comes and finds something out of sorts and asks for that change, they're going to have to come back to us, I would assume, for a modification. But based on what they might have done already,
They shouldn't be doing any work before they get those outside agency permits, even if
but it
you're
doesn't say-
granting.
Well, I mean.
But that's up to them
But
to
they
know.
would be in
and the
violation
other
of the other
agencies
permits.
to for-
Yes, I know that. I'm just saying, if they got a permit from us tonight and wanted to start the work next week,
They can't.
that's their choice. I mean, yes, they can't, but that would be their choice. And if they started doing work, removing boulders or changing around the shoreline edges, and it turned out, I mean, this is all hypothetical, obviously, and it turned out that they were told by DEP that they couldn't use that method, they had to change things in a total way that would have made what they did, I'm using the word inappropriate for that land structure or that land mass, then it causes even more problems for that stabilization that they've already begun and they shouldn't have. So yes, they're going to get slapped on the wrist by a whole bunch of people, but it's the land that we should be protecting in this situation.
Yes. Lynn?
I would like to assume that the professionals who are in charge of these projects will follow the process. They know the regs, they know the rules, and if in fact the rules say you don't begin until you have all approvals in place, I would be willing to take a leap and approve it so that they can check off one of those approval boxes from us. And if DEP snags them and says, no, it can't be that way, they'll come back.
But it doesn't say that they can't start the work. That's all I'm saying. It should say someplace on here in that line that work cannot begin until all approvals have been received. That's all I'm saying.
Maybe
Just
if you
as-
leave it, word it more broadly, so that it doesn't come down to the code officer making that interpretation about what those permits are. Because the way you said it before, it kind of indicated that, and we don't want him to have that liability because they're not his standards that he's dealing with. But there might be a way to, I see what you're saying, there might be a way to tweak it so it's not creating an enforcement issue for permits that have nothing to do with us, but more.
I didn't know I was saying those things, but I hear what you're saying.
I think that there's basic language that we can use to, that basically that our approval is subject to the issuance of
So that's a good
of
word.
the DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers permit. I think that's manageable, and, you know, I really don't have much concern about that being an issue. The concerns that I raised, which I want to emphasize, have nothing to do with, this isn't about your application,
No,
Carter.
this
It
is-
isn't about
this
your
is a
owners.
learning curve
It's
for the
about-
process.
It's
I
about this board
get it.
trying to figure out this thing that's new to this board, is the fact that the ordinance that has now been imposed on us to ensure is satisfied sets standards that we have to find. I mean, think about this in terms of a neighbor who feels that we've skipped a step and issued a permit that didn't satisfy the standards. It's going to undo it and take us back to court to show how we had those findings. Those findings, which are, you'll note that, we often have all the things that we have to satisfy, like on subdivision review, are always spelled out here in the staff guide. We don't have a lot of description there. And my recollection is that some of those things include findings that the project won't adversely affect wildlife, won't adversely affect, the aspects of intertidal, access, won't affect navigation, won't affect, there's a number of categories that we have to find that, based on a review of this project application, we have sufficient information that we find that it satisfies these standards. My concern is when we look at the basic application here, which outlines what's being built, where it's being built, doesn't provide sufficient information, and I feel comfortable saying that we can find that those things have been satisfied. I think the reason why I keep on pressing that there's some advantage of waiting until we have the DEP findings is because the DEP's findings overlap on many of those same issues. And knowing that the DEP reviewed this and said, we're confident that there are no, wildlife adverse impacts, that would certainly give me a heck of a lot more confidence in saying, we're good, I can find that. I agree with Todd that should rely on our staffs, but I don't see in the staff reports anything that addresses the things that we need to find.
So that's the other, second document you had before you with the draft findings. The other thing, regardless of the DEP, if you feel like there's a standard that you don't have information to show that they meet, then, you can make that request to the applicant and let them know what standard you don't feel like they meet and what information they would need to provide to you to show that they do meet the standard.
And this is to the point that,
Sorry, we talked about this hand up before you came in. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, and this is the point that I,
Sorry.
at least to my view, I believe that the findings that are in that DEP, the issuance of the DEP permit, provide all of that information. That, we need not ask the applicant to go and gather more information, because they've already done that. The DEP will affirmatively be entering findings on the same categories of issues that we need to find on, that will allow us to, enter findings with assurance. And, with that in mind, I'd move that an applications, this application, tabled until we can consider the DEP findings in order to incorporate them into our own requirements for findings.
Is that a formal motion?
Is a formal motion.
Okay, you sold me, second.
Discussion?
I was going to say further discussion. So I think I would be more agreeable to add whatever the the wording was into this fourth portion of the motion that's written here that allows us to wait, and I'm not wait, but give them the permit as long as they do not start the work until everything has come through. We always get to look at it when the permits come in. If the permit comes in and says, you know, they can't do so-and-so, it's going to come to our, I guess, our code enforcement person who's going to flag it, and then there might have to be changes, and we might have to redo the permit or something. I'm sure we would have the next shot at it if the DEP or any of these other ones come back adversely. So I'm more agreeable, and I would not vote, I'm just telling you now, I will not vote for what you said, because I don't see the point of waiting. I just would like to see the wording adjusted to take into account that there are permits here, and the work should not be started until all permits have been received and looked at by, I don't know who. Code enforcement, planning, I don't know who.
Yeah,
would-
I don't know that we actually always get copies of them. The burden of proof is always on the applicant to make sure that
So then they should
get those
submit them
permits.
to be added as part of the permit that they've been given.
Some of them we do. I can't comment on all of these ones if Nick is notified or not.
So there'd be, what you're suggesting, Linda, is it'd be two conditions. One is they can't start work until all the applicable permits are received, and B, that they submit those to the codes officer.
I guess I would ask Carter to clarify what you get back for I know some DEP permits, you don't get documentation. You wait a certain amount of days and then you can start work. In this case, will you get
This is a full
documentation back?
NRPA
Yeah,
application, so we get
that sheet back, yeah.
full NRPA application back. If it was a permit by rule,
You'd get
we get
nothing.
nothing back. We apply, if nothing is said within 14 days, we go. In this proposed language for a motion, it does say that the application must apply for and obtain all applicable permits for the preceded development under the NRPA. So it's already saying that we must, before we go, obtain them in your motion already put together by Caroline.
But I'm saying, I'm sticking on.
You want us not to start until.
Right. It doesn't say
Which is just to obtain, and maybe if you just add, obtain and start project.
Or prior to the commencement
Or
of work.
something like that, a simple word like is what she's
Yeah, that's what I'm
asking.
saying. Is there a simple phrase?
Yeah,
we
there
can
is a
add?
simple fix, but you guys still have an
We
active
still have an
motion
active
that was
motion.
moved and
Okay, so
seconded.
let's-
So I think you need
let's
to resolve
Focus on
that.
What
this.
was your motion again?
The one that you seconded?
Yes. Oh, the wording.
My motion was that we table this to the meeting immediately after the issuance of the DEP permit in order to factor the DEP's findings into our own findings and satisfaction of our ordinance.
And that's for all projects of this nature.
It's for, well.
You're only
it's-
asking
it's
for
only
one specific
can't
to
set
this
rules, so
right
that's
now.
for that's for this application that's before us.
But okay, I guess I was like
And I would do the same.
forwarding that.
I would do the same thing for the next for the next application and the next one after that. But I recognize that we can't, we're not changing the ordinance as much as saying we're trying to catch up on and understand, understand
how it
what,
works.
what satisfying these standards means. And at least for this first couple batches, those findings are certainly going to give me a lot more comfort in entering findings that we meet what the ordinance requires.
If you guys go ahead and act on this motion and make it, I think like I said, it's very concerning to me that we're trying to rely on DEP that goes against the legal advice we've been given. I think if there's information you need or things you're not clear on, that you table this for, you need to be very clear to the applicant what standards they're not showing you that they meet and what else it is that you want to see. Can't just be relying on DEP for their comments on a separate set of standards.
Jason,
Give
did you
them
have any
some
comments on
clarity.
the motion?
Well, I mean, I felt like it was headed in the right direction in terms of sequence, knowing that we're not technical experts in the marine environment. Well, theoretically, we could have someone on the board who is, but we don't. And it does throughout each one of these proposals we've seen so far, like we're a little bit in the dark or not as well informed about the nature of what we're being asked to approve. So I think that's where all the hesitation comes from. And I mean, I guess at the moment, I would tend to, if we were voting, go along with what James has motioned, to have the time to improve our process.
Okay.
One more comment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If we do follow through on the motion on the floor, how are you expecting, if the Federal Clean Waters Act doesn't respond, and if the other one doesn't respond, does that, I mean, what you're saying is they would have to get all of these permits and approvals coming in and in front before anything is done. So there's a lot of things here that I don't know what the methods
Which is
of
why I
the-
think you guys really need to focus on the standards you have before you and what information you need to make those determination without just relying on the other permits. We don't have that requirement currently in our ordinance based upon advice of the attorney. So they don't have to submit those, but they do have to submit enough information in compliance with the ordinance and to give you the information you need to show that they meet the standards which are outlined in the staff report. So if that information is missing, I think that's a better way for you to clarify.
I think one of the things that makes it a little more challenging in this instance is there's not an engineer, like a civil engineer, or someone who specifically handles this type of application, proposing the constructed remedy for the erosion problem. So
Yeah, the shoreline zoning is enforced at the local level by the code officer, so that's why he's the individual that reviewed the application and gave you the staff memo on it, not the engineer.
right, but I guess like in terms of construction method, the proposed construction methodology, not just what goes down on paper, it doesn't have like that stamped professional behind it who's got a lot of experience in the areas of.
Which is not required by the ordinance.
Wouldn't that be nice?
A little history. This is your first riprap coming through, or one of the early ones. This has always been handled by Coastal Waters in the past. This is my first time coming through this board. I've always brought them voluntarily through Coastal Waters through all the years. So the review is by waterfront people. Your department's different, so when you ask for professionals on your board, Coastal Waters is more waterborne. This is the transition line between water and upland. So I can see the confusion in why, which side of the line are you talking about working with? So it is a new process for you. This is obviously not our first job. This is our first time through this board for riprap, though.
I think we're on our fourth one now,
Yeah,
right?
Jason, I would go back and I guess two things. One is going back to Caroline's note, is that I think we're going to need to be specific if we're going to table this so that the applicant can go back and get the information that they need to. And I don't think we're doing that right now. Second of all, I have a lot of confidence in our staff. And that's Caroline, that's the planning department, that's the code officer. And I think that that's the way organizations operate. You draw on the expertise that's around you. And I think that, I don't see that we have right now substantial ground to table this. I understand what Linda is saying, and I would go along with that that condition. But other than that, I think we're setting a difficult precedent for us if we do in fact table this for the reasons that I've heard so far. And I think there'd be a lot of sorting out to do.
And as far as process, I feel like we need to continue to work with the DEP. You know, they're the ones that says these have to go through the planning board, shoreline zoning, is enforced at the local level by the code enforcement officer. These are the minimum standards that we incorporated into the ordinance. We've talked about potentially seeing if there's any way we could transfer this to staff review, which we're not sure if they would go along with. And if they say no to that, then I think, we need to put the ball back in their court to get us some additional training so that these applications are easier to process and so that the board doesn't, of course you do want to rely on professional staff, but you yourselves want to have a better understanding where you're the ones taking action on the application before you.
Yes.
But based on the staff report, this application does meet all of the standards as set forth in our shoreland zoning ordinance.
If they were to get with the suggested conditions of approval, obviously, condition 1, standard, condition 4 was at the request of the board, potentially to be tweaked. Number 2 and 3, they would need any permits from the code officer, because this is in the flood zone, but then also they would still have to submit that erosion and sedimentation control plan, which would be part of the code officer's review anyways. But again, you still have an active motion on the floor
Right.
that you need to do something with.
Correct.
Would you like me to withdraw my second?
If you'd like to.
I will.
Okay. With that in mind, does anybody else want to second the motion? Okay, that said, the motion is not moving forward. Okay, back to the subject at hand. Are there any more questions on the application or for the applicant? From the board? Okay. Are there any questions from the public? Anyone here online?
You don't have any hands raised online.
Okay. Is there a motion? Linda?
If Caroline can help
I was-
me with what should be.
Yeah, I was going
the
to say, do you
appropriate-
want, I had jotted some notes. So I think based upon what I've been hearing you say, Linda, I thought if you wanted to, on number 4, under the word obtain, you could insert approval for. So it would say must apply for and obtain approval for all applicable permits. Would leave that broad, so it is still up to the applicant to know what they need to submit. Again, that's out to the applicant and the outside agencies. However, on the end of that, after land, strike the period and add prior to starting any site work.
Right.
That, I think that achieves your objective and leaves it broad enough that we're not leaving it up to the code officer to determine what outside agency permits are required for a project.
Okay, so that phrase is coming at the very end, is what you're saying?
Yeah, if you feel like that achieves what you're out looking for.
Okay. I will make a motion to approve the application of a shoreline zoning permit for Paul and Regina Castronovo for a shoreline stabilization project at 14 Merganser Way, as written with the inclusion of an addition to section 4 at the end of the last sentence. Can I just say it in this way? Add a comma after development of land and add the text prior to starting any site work.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Hey, can I just clarify a question? There's a reference in the staff report, and maybe I'm just not seeing it because this is what was discussed when I missed it, that there's going to be proposed findings of fact that are
Yep.
separate, so.
There was
but I'm
another
not
one in
seeing
front
that
of, there was
fact
another
in
one
that
in front of you.
Seeing the one for the next item.
Do you want to just take one of ours to look at?
Yeah, right there.
It's
Here
at
you
the
go.
bottom.
Oh, is this, yeah, addendum. You got it?
At the bottom.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Nays? Okay, 4-1. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Okay. Our next item And by the way, this is all good discussion, so.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that.
No, it is. We've-
It is,
we've-
it is really good
It's
discussion.
important
Formulating this, what's
because
going to go
we've got to
forward.
improve the process going forward, and you know, the DEP's changing, we're changing, and it's important that we're all, you know, coming together to make sure that the process is working. So
And I think it-
there's room for improvement.
I think you raised really good points on things we can get additional clarification for and need to work with DEP on.
All right, you don't need to support my feelings.
Yep.
I am,
No,
Don't worry, Jim, we won't.
no, I'm not trying to.
Don't mind being the odd man out.
No, no,
so it's okay.
well, I think it's important that we continue this process of improvement. So, all right. 1131 US Route 1, after the fact change of use.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm an abutting neighbor, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Caroline.
Hold on one second. Okay, sorry. This is an after the fact approval for a change of use. There's a property on US Route 1 North that back in the day was permitted as a single-family dwelling. On the abutting lot, there was a garage that had been used, I believe accessory at one point as a home occupation. They have now attempted to merge them into one lot, although there needs to be some deed work there. The applicant uses this barn/garage to store equipment occasionally and work on equipment for a business they actually have in another community. Because they were using it and storing stuff there, the code officer, I don't know if he sent them a notice or at least reached out and said, that's a commercial use. You need to come to the board for site plan approval. It's gone, due to the size, scale, and nature, it's gone beyond the limits of a home occupation, and it wasn't on the same parcel originally. So the structure is existing. You had some pictures in your packet of the barn-like structure. There's some temporary structures that were put in without permits, I believe. There were some issues with encroachment into the stream and some DEP issues. DEP has actually been out to the site to work with the applicant to deal with some of those issues. It is in the urban impaired watershed, so they will have to treat for stormwater management. This is in the MDA, MDB. We've seen other projects in this zone. There are a lot of standards in there as called out in the staff report regarding appearance of the building, screening in the front and side, setbacks, visibility of the structure, outdoor storage, the needing for outdoor storage to be screened, parking. There is area on site. Parking would need to be designated on the plan. They need to show that they can meet the requirements for both standard and accessible parking. They would need to get change of use for the two entrances off of US Route 1. The building has no water and sewer, so that's not really a concern, and they're not proposing any signage. They would need to submit information on solid waste disposal. They did ask for a waiver on lighting. That's something for the board to consider, whether or not they want to waive the submission requirements there. At minimum, we would want to know that they are using full cutoff fixtures as that's required by the ordinance. And then again, in MDA, MDB, there are substantial landscaping requirements. This is existing. The same standards still apply. One of the questions I had for the board, it's on here as conceptual tonight, is do you want to schedule a site walk? Applicants here, they can show you pictures and walk you through the application in detail.
Yes, would the applicant like to?
I can put this plan up.
You'll just need to take a wireless mic from the podium on the side there if you're gonna. Okay.
And then I'll go up and flip it, but, so I'm Esther Bizier from Mainland Development Consultants. I'm here tonight with my coworker Shane Howley, and then also the applicants, Terry and Dave Davis. And, so Mainland, we got brought into the project this summer, and we used an existing survey plan that the applicants had.
We did wetland mapping and confirmed like the edge of the stream, mapped the wetlands along the stream, and basically put an existing conditions plan together that showed some of the temporary structures and like a temporary storage container, and some of the storage areas that have been added to the site since the original survey was completed in 2020. So that's the existing conditions plan C 1.1 in the packets, and which we're showing right now. So the applicants, they've done a lot of landscaping on the property to try to make it look nice. They've talked to the town a few times and want to bring this into compliance. So we're helping them put a plan together to do that. So I'll flip this around and.
Could you reference what section or page in here when you do that?
Yeah, so the plans are all in section 13 of the application. And there's a table of contents on like page 2, which will tell you kind of where to go for everything. As far as some of the improvements and changes, so they are gonna revegetate some of the gravel areas. And they're proposing to move, there's a like metal storage container. So right now that is, I don't know the exact setback from the property line, probably about 20 feet. They're proposing to move that in to meet the 50-foot setback for storage and revegetating a bunch of that gravel area that's on the northern portion of the site. All the area being revegetated is shown in a hatch on the site plan, and that's site plan C 2.1, which shows proposed changes. They're proposing some more vegetative plantings. So right now there's an existing row of trees along the northern property line. They are proposing to plant, it's a total of like 27, I believe, new trees. And that's to help with some of the screening requirements. We talked about doing a fence, but they'd prefer to not install a fence around the storage areas that are essentially adjacent to the barn, which is in the center of the property. And when I say barn, it's the garage, which built in a barn style, which you'll see in the pictures, which are in, I believe, section 5 of the application. So as far as other changes, we did propose a small stormwater treatment filter that's adjacent to the stream buffer, kind of on the western portion of the site. And I'm trying to think what else I should point out to you. As Caroline mentioned, so the barn was permitted in 2017, I believe, by the town. There are some light fixtures on it, so they have light fixtures above the garage doors and then a smaller light fixture on either side where there's a man door. So there's a total of 8 fixtures. All of them are like the downcast cutoff fixtures. I talked to the applicants, and I did find a cut sheet of a fixture that's similar to what's there, which I do have if anybody would like to see that, or we can submit that. Again, I know the town engineer still has to review stormwater, and we're also still working with DEP on some of the impacts, which, as far as impacts, there's no impacts to the stream and no impacts to the wetlands adjacent to the stream. There is some impact within the 75-foot stream buffer, and that's the temporary, what we call the dome tent, which is like a Quonset hut style tent. That's within the 75-foot setback, and then there's also some gravel area and clearing within that setback as well. So that is in process with DEP, and we're waiting to hear back from them on that. But we're here to answer any questions that you have, and
Thank you. I have a question for Caroline. So our role is to review this without bias to what's there today.
Yeah, they still need to meet the same standards that we have in place for that zoning district. Where it is there, I know they're waiting to resolve for DEP. I think if you want to do a site walk, since everything exists, I think you probably have time and it probably wouldn't cause a delay to the applicant.
Okay. Okay. Are there questions, comments from the board?
I would agree with needing a site walk. So, we can talk about it generally now, but I think after a site walk, we will have more specific things to discuss.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. That will help to understand what's the nature of the site better.
Okay.
But if you wouldn't mind, could you talk about the screening ideas and what the vegetation?
Yeah, so the property when they purchased the property, it was generally wooded. They first cleared for the house, and then when they purchased the remainder of the second lot that was adjacent to the house, they cleared a bunch of the site for the garage and then gravel area. So there are still some large trees along Route 1. DOT actually went in and cleared out a bunch of the vegetation that was kind of closer to the road, like right adjacent to the property line, which opened things up.
I'm sorry, which road? Because 295 is,
So Route 1, 295 is to the northwest, and there's a large buffer between them and 295. There's a whole other property between them.
Oh, okay.
And 295. So they're not adjacent to 295, but adjacent to Route 1. And so DOT cleared out a bunch of kind of the smaller brush that was out front. They did leave a lot of the larger, taller trees that are on the property line, so those remain. There's a lot of landscaping done around the house, so you can picture like kind of the landscape style trees and shrubs. There's a lot of flower beds and things like that. They did plant a vegetative screen, so along the property line with the neighbor to the north, and those are, I believe, Norway spruce. They're proposing to plant some additional Norway spruce between the property line, or between the road and then the use on the inside, so at the front of the site.
And I guess the question about the two properties being joined together. Will that be completed and established before we're done with what we need to do here, or at least I would like it to be?
We thought it was completed, and the applicants thought it was completed. And then Nick let me know that, or the assessor actually said that there is still potentially an issue with that. So Nick Adams, the CEO, said he didn't see an issue with this proceeding, as long as it does get cleaned up. But it's been filed, and we submitted what was filed, so.
And it was approved by the prior inspector, prior to Nick, that we could put our garage on the we have two lots.
can I have you come up here? Thank you. And identify yourself.
I'm Terry Davis, and I'm one of the owners.
Thank you.
And we bought the land originally, the lot that our house is on, and then a couple of years later, the secondary lot come available. And then we put in for a permit to build our barn, and the prior inspector went out and staked it out with us and approved us to put the barn there. And even though we own both lots, it was approved there until the next inspector, which is now Nick, come in and said, you can't have your barn a part of one property and part of the other property, but it was already done. So we actually went and had a lawyer redo the property lines, and it was filed. So this is the first I've heard tonight that something was wrong.
And the deed is included in the application.
Yeah, and the deed's there. It's been all put as one lot now.
We would need to make sure that it was done right. They know that it needs to be looked at to make sure there's no property line, because even if you own both properties, you need to make sure that you're complying with setbacks. I think it it can be done. We've done it conditionally in other cases. They'd have to potentially get after-the-fact permits and change of use for some of this, so I think there'd be a threshold to flag it, but the intent was to make that property line go away, have it be on one property so that they meet all setbacks, and then cleaner buffer requirements from the setbacks and stuff like that. I think from a staff perspective, the things that kind of jump out, you have provisions here for overhead doors, you have provisions for screening, you have provisions for buffering. MDA, MDB is really a mixed area with a variety of residential and commercial uses. So to see how that building actually sits in relation to the buffers and the visibility. And then I think you'd want to see the outdoor storage areas too, because anything they're going to store outside needs to be fully screened per the requirements of the ordinance. So that's something I think could be helpful to see on site. And then there were pictures of, I don't like calling it a garage. It's a very, I think, visually appealing structure, not what you think when you just think of a garage. So making sure the board has an opportunity to see the actual structure that we're talking about might be helpful too. As you,
So there are pictures of the garage and then also the building plans. And the building plans of the garage, those are in section 12. So you can see the style. It's a barn with some different roof lines, and they have like a little cupola thing on top. So it is a very like visually appealing building, which it meets those standards as far as height and kind of the roof lines and styles like that. We did ask for a waiver because there are 3 garage doors on the side that it doesn't directly face Route 1. It's kind of kitty-cornered to the road, but it's visible from the road, and I believe Caroline had pointed that out as well in the staff report, that the code does state that there would only be 1 door allowed to be visible from the road side. But where it's an existing structure that was approved and permitted by the town, and even if it was being permitted as a residential garage, that code still would have applied. So we're asking that the board would waive that standard.
Question for Caroline again. So we've been through 2 codes. We're dealing with 2 codes enforcement officers. And how do we, if something was approved but not consistent in the manner?
are you specifically referring to the overhead doors?
Yes.
The overhead doors specifically says non-residential uses. My understanding is that barn garage structure was previously permitted as a residential
But
use.
was it residential at the time?
That is my understanding. I can double check that on the permit, but yes, my understanding is that was.
Not how it was approved, but was it residential?
It was used in a residential nature and in association with a single-family dwelling. There is not a actual residence in the barn.
No, I'm just trying to find if
It was not a commercial use.
If it was approved as a residential structure, but when it was occupied right away, that was not the intent. It was to be for commercial purposes as it is today.
It was permitted as a residential structure. It was not deemed subject to site plan review. They did not come before the board. How they were using it on what point in time, I feel like is beyond me. It may be more of an enforcement issue, but at this point, the use has been flagged as beyond residential in nature, and I believe it might actually be bigger than the house itself, which is why I think the accessory portion was flagged.
To build on the
Yeah.
questions you asked, I mean, maybe there's a better, well, just to kind of understand some of those facts. When was the barn built?
Yep, so the barn was built in 2017, I believe,
With
or
a permit?
2016, with a permit
reviewed by
from the
code
code
enforcement.
office, yeah.
When did the commercial operation in the barn begin?
That I do not know. It was sometime after it was built and before 2020, so.
Is there anyone who's here tonight who knows the answer to that question?
Did the
So-
applicant physically build the barn, or was it prior to your ownership?
Yes, they constructed the barn, yeah.
I can
And
pull the permits too for when they come back and whatever else is in the file, if that would be helpful for the board.
yeah, what was in the file, there was the building permit for the house, the permit for the septic, and then the permit for the barn as well. And a few odds and ends here and there. As far as the commercial use, I think that they just started using it for equipment maintenance, kind of they started using it for maintenance at some point in time, and then it got flagged, I think, when they discovered the issue with the property line. So that's my understanding from talking with the applicants and then from talking to Nick. But there wasn't an actual violation issued either, so it's just been on good faith that the Davises resolve, the change of use. Right.
It looks like a notice of violation was issued in December of 2019.
A notice of what?
A notice of violation issued by the code officer about several complaints regarding commercial activities, October 2019.
Okay.
So that's 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's like, when you say commercial, it is our business, but there's no people on the property at all but us. It's our equipment, and it's not a business run out of there. We put up steel, and it's not done at the barn. There's no work done there. It's just our equipment there. That's why we put in for construction, storage, service, so we could actually bring our equipment there when it needed to be serviced or switched in between jobs, like going from one job to the other. Equipment, right now, we have to pay for it to go to other places and sit until it goes on to another job, but if the equipment's sitting, it's not making money, so usually it doesn't sit. But there's nobody else on the property, it's just us. It's not a business, we're not asking for signs, we're not asking for anything different.
Yeah.
When the barn was built in 2017, it was built for the purpose that you're using it for today?
No.
To store, it was built for some purpose other than storing your business
We built
equipment?
it for our own personal things, for our camper, for our boats, for stuff that we wanted in there.
And when did you begin using it for your business equipment?
Currently, the inside of the barn is virtually no business. There's nothing business in there.
You're welcome, come look in there.
I have collector cars, I restore snowmobiles, personally, for myself. So as far as equipment in the actual barn, it's non-existent. We still use it for our own personal use. What we want is to be able to keep our equipment outside.
And that was the basis, equipment outside was the basis of the notice of violation that was issued?
Exactly. It wasn't anything to do with the barn. Nick come and walk through, and it was just the equipment in the yard.
Understood. But in essence, because the zoning applies to the entire property, not just this structure versus that structure, that's why we're talking about the entire property rather than the barn versus the yard.
Yeah, because when we did build it, we had no equipment there at all. As the business grew, just in between, sometimes we'd put it from one job to the other, it would come either to be serviced, and then it was gone. It's not like, there's nobody else on the property but us.
Yeah, and that's, in the application, we reflect that as far as equipment's temporarily on site. So it's like a few days, maybe like a week or two at the most. And they're the only people on site. There's not employees parking there. There's no employees doing maintenance or anything like that there, so there's really no need for like employee parking, if you will. So I think that's why we're asking for a waiver for those standards, but.
Are there construction materials being stored there as well as
No,
equipment?
we provide labor only.
And I think one other question. What are the nature of the abutters? Are they commercial, are they residential, are they mixed?
There's generally residences, and then
There's a business beside us.
a butter to the north is a business. It's a bed and breakfast, I believe.
And the next one over is construction, Zaco
Yeah.
Construction.
Mr. Chairman, is this a matter that's open for a public hearing here tonight?
Yeah, I mean, you guys always usually take public comment, not officially notice
enough for it,
legally,
okay.
but yeah, you could take public comment and then decide what you want to do or what other information you might need.
Yeah, and I'd like to, since we have the applicant here, continue with questions. And I agree, I think a site walk is probably highly likely from what I'm hearing. But I'd like to continue the discussion until we're ready to close it.
Yeah, we'd like to provide you with whatever information we can, so.
Yeah.
And forgive me, Mr. Chair, I wasn't trying to expedite you as much as
No,
knowing that,
yeah.
you know, if there's public discussion that's part of this, I would like to hear that.
Okay. Just, we haven't heard from Linda. Did you, okay, on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I
sorry.
guess.
Okay.
I would like to have.
Just any other questions from the board right now at this point?
I guess, so knowing better now that there's equipment being stored on the site, I'm presuming that, well, it looks kind of like from the photos now that there's a large area of what I'll call pavement. It's for, the vehicles themselves and turning radiuses and whatnot. That's going to be impervious area, and that's factored into your stormwater calculations.
Correct, yes. So our stormwater calculations include all of the impervious area that's associated with the barn, with the laydown yard or where the equipment's parked. And we didn't include the house and the portion of the driveway that is for parking associated with the house, but did include everything else on site.
The commercial uses.
Yeah, anything that would be associated or sort of used in addition to that contractor services use.
And with that, I'd like to open it up to public comment. We'll start here first. Yes, sir.
Hi,
If you
I'm
could come up-
the neighbor on the north.
If you could come up and identify yourself in front of the microphone. Thank you.
I'm Bill Hamlin. I'm the neighbor on the north side of the property line, the Orchard House and Cafe. It is a B&B and soon-to-be restaurant at some point. I do support my neighbors in doing what they're planning on accomplishing. The one issue that I do see is the new location of their Conex box or their storage container. Where it was previously placed, it was set back out of sight, out of view from my property itself. And now with the new location, it's dead center view for my guests, for my business, for property value, whatever it may be. And that's the only concern I really have. I know that there are codes of height and fencing, and I would agree, I would prefer no fencing necessary. But perhaps some more buffer between those elements, equipment or whatever. That's all I'm going to ask for.
Okay. Any questions?
Is this storage container the same as the dome tent?
No, so those are two separate temporary structures. So the storage container is shown, right now it's up in the very corner of the site, so the northwestern corner, kind of set back. But in order to meet the town setbacks, we're proposing to move it interior to the site, and then it's also coming forward to get out of the stream setback, and some of the area that they're revegetating, so it'll be kind of on the edge of the gravel. And so the dome tent, I'll go point it out just so you can see it, or the storage container, and then the dome tent is behind the barn.
And if I could say something too, like where the storage container is right here, it's kind of like what Bill said. It's hidden in the trees, even though it's close to the property line, but if it gets moved out here, he's gonna see it from his bed and breakfast, and it's just gonna be an eyesore for him. Right now, it's hidden in the trees, but just pointing out, like he said as well, that it is 20 feet from the property line. We can move it, it's not a problem, but it will be an eyesore to pop it right in the middle of the lot versus hidden in the trees.
When you step away from the podium, I can't hear you. Can you carry that with you? Sorry. Thanks.
Sorry. I would just say that if you're going to do a site visit, if you could just, if you wanted to come see from my perspective, you can do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Is the location shown on the plan here the objectional location, or?
So that's the proposed location where we would propose to move it in order to meet the town setback requirements, which would be a 50-foot offset from the property line.
And that is the objectionable?
And that's the objectionable location.
But we have to
to
treat it like a
abutters.
permanent structure, so it has to meet the setbacks.
I actually took note on that. It's a unique thing. I believe it would probably be considered a structure, but I do want to confirm that. I'll get that information for you.
Yeah, and I think
Unless you
part of it
already
was just
did
that
confirm
any
that.
storage couldn't be within 50 feet. So we were considering that. And again, in the gravel area where it's located now, there's a little bit of storage. So we were proposing to remove that in order to meet that requirement of the
I think
50-foot.
The other thing you're gonna need to look at is, like, buildings have some design standards there, and so I think that's a second potential issue about that structure.
If it becomes a
Another
permanent
reason-
standard, if it becomes a
Yeah.
permanent structure, then it becomes,
I think it'd be really helpful to see all of this, to see what they do have some existing vegetation, they did do some planting to see what's there, clarify the permitting on the structures, the commercial use timing, the Connex specs, those are the things I have written that you guys have kind of flagged.
And as far as the Connex box, I would consider it, it's a temporary. It's temporary. It's really, it could move anywhere on the site or be gone kind of at any time, so. But sure, we'll look at it.
I have a question for my not understanding terminology. What is a Connex box?
They're like big shipping containers, so like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, big metal containers.
And is that what the storage, is that
That's
what is
what-
holding this storage container?
Yes, yeah.
and is
And
that,
the dome tent, is that,
Yeah, it's
that,
a metal
tinted-
frame and then you put like basically a
it's on
tarp
your other picture?
over it, yeah.
Caroline, yeah, it would be helpful if we could get clarification on that.
And I don't believe that the other two structures permits were pulled for, correct?
That's correct. So the dome tent, and again, because it would be considered temporary, there wasn't a permit pulled for that one.
Can we require screening where, if it's trees or something, because even though it might hit in the setback line? I'm talking about
Say that again?
the storage area. Are we allowed to require landscape screening of large enough to cover this?
There are landscape buffer and screening requirements in this district, so yeah, if you can tie it to a standard, you can. Those, again, I'll clarify the Connex box, but we don't acknowledge temporary structures, so they'd have to be permitted as permanent structures. It sounds like a permit was not pulled for that, so all of this, I think, would need to be rectified as part of this process.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the public? Okay. Anybody online?
You have one person online, but there's no hands raised.
Okay. Any other questions?
To clarify, to follow up, how long has the dome tent been in place?
About this time last year.
Yeah,
And what is the plan, that it's going to continue to be there in perpetuity?
Yes.
And how long is
Equipment buys.
I'm sorry?
Our equipment, my whole idea behind the tent was anything that is in the tent isn't visible,
Understand?
to people driving by and what have you. So there's a lot of the equipment in the tent,
And how long has the storage container been there?
How long?
How long?
Last summer, yeah.
And that, like the dome tent, is planning to be there in perpetuity?
Yes.
I have a question. I don't even know if it's an appropriate question. You don't have to answer this at all if it's not correct. You have this large barn building. You say it's predominantly empty.
You should come look in it, it's not empty.
It's not empty.
full.
I have,
It's just
I
not
have a lot of
filled with
cars.
construction equipment?
Right.
But
No, it's
now you
not.
have two additional structures that are holding your related stuff for your
When we built the
construction?
barn, it was for our personal use, which we're still using it, our personal use. Inside, it has, if you come and look, you're welcome to come in. We have cars we restore,
Okay.
you know, and so it's all personal inside. And we come in for the construction storage use, so outside, like if we had to park like lifts or a crane or something outside in between jobs, they could sit in our dooryard, but they would sit out back. You would have to, I guess, come see that you can see how the land's situated and it's landscaped. And if that connex does get moved, which is fine if we have to, there's no way of screening it unless you put trees in the middle of a parking lot, which is going to make a mess for the neighbor to see. But you have to, I guess you'd have to see it to understand it.
I guess we will.
Okay. Do we need to table this for, formally table this for a site walk, or do we just?
Yeah, you
Is that
could, it would
something
be
I can
good.
just say, we're going to do a site walk?
I think you guys could set a date for a site walk, and then you could just table it. Someone can make a motion to table the review of the application until after the site walk's completed.
I'm open to a motion.
Can I, just a question for that? Do we have to are we still waiting for other information from them? Or the only thing we're holding off on is the site walk? So in other words, I'm asking this question because would we assume that our next meeting, we would have the site walk done, all their information in, and then we would be working on doing whatever approvals at the next meeting? Or is there still additional things? I'm trying to think of the next 2 weeks or the next week and a half or so is kind of a dead week, and then you have to have things in 2 weeks
Yes.
before, and are we into January, or are we
My un-
going into February?
My understanding is that you weren't trying to turn around and make a submission next week for January, correct?
I don't know that we will, but we
Okay.
do have everything. So we submitted everything like per the standards, and then there were a few questions that the town engineer had related to some of like the lighting, and some of the questions that we were hoping could maybe get waived. But I have gathered that information. We are waiting on main DEP, and I don't think that we probably won't have their final say next week. But we do have the other information. The one thing, I know I talked with the town engineer about stormwater, so he hasn't reviewed, and we do have, I think, a little bit of additional work that we'll have to do on that design, based on some information with the urban impaired stream. But I think in general, that design will look pretty similar. So we did submit or ask for waivers on what was needed, and I do have a little bit of additional information with like a lighting fixture and like that agent authorization, but.
I guess I'll put this out there for feedback. So they're up in the air. Submissions for January would be due next Wednesday by noon. I think if you might do a site walk, and then once you see what's there and you see the plantings, you might then feel like you have everything you need to make a decision, or you might not feel that way. So I think one thing you could potentially do if you wanted to is schedule a site walk. Well, this time of year, you could choose to do it on the weekend, or you could choose to do it prior to the meeting. You could have the site walk. You look at the site, you can't have substantial conversation about the application out in the field. That needs to happen in the meeting room. But you could do a site walk, and then if you wanted to, even if the applicant didn't submit new information, you could put them on the agenda for the next meeting if they want, just to give them feedback as a result of the site walk, and then they could pull any additional information together and return to you at a timeline that worked for them.
And I suspect a site walk would probably be more beneficial, more productive, with less snow cover in this particular instant.
Yeah, and
Daylight.
Yeah, daylight would be good.
I say daylight, I think, is the big question.
All the snow will be gone for.
I think all the snow will be gone this weekend, but,
Well, that's what but
And
there may be
actually-
some at some point down
Yeah.
the road, but, so,
Right.
trying to schedule it perhaps sooner than later, given the weather that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we could schedule a site walk on a standalone date. It doesn't have to be the meeting date, so we have to publicly notice it, so we need at least, 7 to 10 days to get notice out, but we could schedule that anytime as needed. We are short a few board members, so if you want to, excuse me, come up with a few tentative dates, I'm happy to coordinate with the board and the applicant. We would then provide public notice.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, I think this same question was asked, forgive me if it's redundant. So is the submission complete that if we had all the information we wanted as to the site walk, that we could act today?
If you feel like you have the information to show that all the standards are met, then yes.
But in terms of meeting the submission requirements, it's a complete submission.
I would say with the exception of the stormwater, because they need to design a stormwater based upon a different threshold that they're in an urban impaired stream, and Adam would need time to review that. We typically like that done, completed before.
Yeah. So,
They come back.
I mean, it sounds like, it's just kind of putting it on the next agenda, knowing that it will be a complete application at that time, and then it gives us some flexibility to just get the site walk done sometime before our next meeting. And then we'll be able to pick it up. January?
Yeah, and we can coordinate with the applicant and see timing. It is tricky time of year to schedule a site walk, so if the board's open to a site walk on an extra Wednesday, I think that's good, and then if it gets delayed for weather or whatever.
Saturday or Sunday I don't know, since I've been here, it was like nobody talked about weekends. But
Yeah, back in the day, we've done them like Saturday mornings. I think Sunday's a little bit more of a challenge. People have different Sunday morning commitments.
Well, first,
And we need
let's
to invite the public.
have a motion, and then we can set a date, or get some dates.
So the motion would be to have a site walk
To
scheduled.
table it and condition on a sidewalk.
So moved. My motion is so moved, said, that he said.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
It's proposed.
Okay,
Okay.
that is unanimous. Now, dates.
Sidewalk, what will they do with sidewalk?
Well, if you showed up at the meeting, you get preference. Would you prefer a weekday or a weekend?
Okay.
For a weekday, personally.
Yeah.
I would prefer a weekend.
I would prefer, a weekend depending on what weekend.
Yeah.
Jason?
I guess I'll split it down the middle. I could go either way.
Okay,
There you
so,
go.
How's that for pressure?
real helpful, real helpful. So
We're equally split everywhere.
if we go a weekday, I know we normally meet on Wednesday. Is there a day of the week that actually would work better if we do a site walk?
We can't go at 4
Mid-afternoon.
o'clock or later, so that.
Yeah, I would really get it go by like,
Morning?
Could be morning.
do a morning, yeah.
Thursday or Friday morning.
It would really have to, for me, it would have to be a morning.
Yeah,
You know, decent hour in the morning.
yeah, I mean, we like to do afternoon because we think people could come after work, but we can't go late because it's dark.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we could do
Okay.
morning. I
You
would,
want to check with Ford and Guy?
yeah, I would say like, is 9 o'clock too late for the board in the morning?
9 o'clock's okay, but I really, anything later, I'd likely have to miss it.
I wouldn't
was-
think later than 9.
Yeah, I'm just thinking 9 because then if we have a butters that have to get children off to school, it would give them the opportunity to attend, understanding that
Oh, that's
you all
fair.
have real jobs outside. Okay, so if I,
But can we include the possibility of like the Saturday after New Year's weekend?
okay, so
If some of us still are,
I'll work with the applicant and make sure there's some dates that they're gonna be in town. Would want them to mark off maybe like some of the buffers and setbacks, so I'll make sure we give them time, because a lot of people are taking the next 2 weeks off. And then I will come up with some dates, either 9 o'clock during the week or potentially a Saturday morning. We could do maybe the 7th or the 14th, a holiday, so maybe we could try for the 7th,
yeah,
potentially.
see if it's available.
Oh, I won't be here that weekend. I'll tell you that.
For real?
For real.
Okay. Couldn't tell.
For real.
Okay, so I'll be in touch about dates to a site walk once I make sure that the applicant's around and we can get to the property.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Carolyn, I just need a clarification.
Sure.
Town of Freeport doesn't, a temporary structure needs a permit?
It does,
I mean,
yes.
anything, like if you bought a garage for your car to go in?
Yes. The zoning ordinance does not acknowledge them or does not permit them, so we treat them as all needing permits.
I guess it's because we got,
You can
some other
apply,
people that put them in told us they've got them and they didn't have them, so we probably assumed incorrectly.
other people also do have to apply after the fact.
But, oh, okay, but when I'm saying that's when we did it,
Yeah.
because we didn't know, other people that have them said it's temporary structure.
This is your time to ask for forgiveness, clean up your permitting trail.
Yeah.
Do it all while you're here.
They're here now. I was like, we didn't know.
You're not the first and you're not the last, so we'll get you on the right track. But yes, if you put up any more structures, get a permit.
Thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is Depot Square multiple family housing dwelling conceptual presentation.
Okay.
Welcome back, Lynn.
I'll let Lynn get seated before I dive right in. So we have seen a couple applications for multifamily housing projects in the village. As with the others, the applicant is proposing an 8-unit residential structure on 3 levels. This is actually the site of the current former Petrillo's building on Depot Street, the little red structure where Dominic operated a restaurant. Unfortunately, that structure had a fire damage. So they're proposing to demolish the structure and proposing this new residential structure because they're proposing to create 3 or more lots or units within a 5-year period. They're triggering 3 levels of review: subdivision review, site plan review, design review. I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to say it for members of the public. Subdivision is a multiple level review. In this case, because of the number of units, then the proposed connections to public utilities, it would be a minor subdivision. Minor subdivision is typically a 2-phase process. They have the conceptual review and process where you deem the appropriate areas have been determined for development and for open space. As you know, in the VC1, they calculate the net residential acreage. There's no open space requirement. And then once conceptual approval is granted, they would go away, do all their engineering, fine tune their plans, and come back for final approval. I make that really easy. There's a bunch of checklists and documentation that they need to submit. At the same time, you have the site plan component that looks at the site features, layout, parking, stormwater, trash, utility connections. That does not require action by the board until they take action on the final plan. And then you have design review. Same thing, it does not require formal action on a conceptual phase. Anytime the applicant has multiple layers of approvals required, it's very helpful and beneficial to give them as much feedback as possible on the 3 separate set of standards you're dealing with. As with any site plan and subdivision or design review, you always have the option to set a site walk if you feel it's beneficial. You may or may not feel that way in this case. It is a small lot on Depot Street that's occupied with an existing structure. General layout will remain the same, however, the structure will get slightly bigger. This is set up tonight if you feel like, based upon the information submitted by the applicant, you have enough information to determine that the building's in the right spot, and that they're keeping the development out of any environmentally sensitive areas where no open space is required. You could take action on the conceptual subdivision tonight. If you did that, the applicant wouldn't return to you until they were ready for final approval of all 3 components. That being said, what you have here is a 3-story structure. The applicant provided some conceptual renderings to you. It would be connected to public utilities, access to the sites via an easement already from Depot Street. There is some parking on site. This is in the Village Commercial 1, so they can utilize the shared parking concept. In this case, the applicant would be proposing to provide some of the parking on site, and they actually own parking on another property, so they'd be proposing to supply some additional parking off-site, all under the shared parking requirements. You do have some conceptual building renderings. Because of the nature of the application, I thought it'd be helpful to give you something. So they have an idea here of a 3-story building, showing you some potential entry points and window points on the building, and they're looking for some conceptual feedback. Welcome any questions from the board and the applicant and their engineer here tonight.
And in terms of our endpoint for this tonight is conceptual, it could be approval.
That's really always up to the board.
Okay.
If you feel like you have the information you need to make that determination as to the conceptual layout of the subdivision, that they have the building in the right spot, you can do that. If you feel like you don't have enough information and you need more information, I'd give the applicant some guidance on what that is.
Okay.
But again, the only motion here tonight is the conceptual, the only formal motion here tonight is the conceptual subdivision, but you do want to give them feedback on the other two components.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Go ahead. I wasn't going to speak. No. Anything on you?
It's all you.
Yeah, all right, go ahead.
thank you. Well,
Hold, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, he said go ahead. Did you?
I
I was
did.
going to have him.
You go ahead.
I didn't have, I
Before we get
wasn't,
into
He said he
questions.
doesn't have anything to say.
I wasn't going to lead with anything, no. She raised her hand and I motioned to
I'm sorry.
Is your
Cut you
question
Hamlin
off.
to
procedural,
continue
or is it about the
what she was going to ask me.
About the project.
Then let's hear first from the applicant.
He wasn't going to say anything.
You
He
have
is
nothing-
now.
Sorry.
Yeah, she raised her hand to ask a question and I
He's
acknowledged her.
the chairman, though. He chooses.
Yes.
What would you like to hear from me?
I would, well, do you have a presentation? Would you like to walk through it? Anything more than what Caroline went through?
I think she explained it pretty clearly. We had a fire there. We're planning on demolishing the existing structure and building this 3-story residential structure, 8 units. As you can see from the plan here, it's our concept is brick on the bottom, clapboards on the top. The windows that you see on the front view are French balconies, sliding doors, kind of give some openness for the units upstairs. The double door in the middle is a proposed stairwell to the upstairs units. The 2 doors on the sides are private entrances to downstairs units. There was an overhang that existed on the smaller building. We proposed to keep that overhang. We'd have to make it a little bit smaller to meet setback requirements. It's 5'4" now, and I think on the proposed building, it's 3 feet worth of an overhang. You see on the top, there's a facade. The facade up there would hide the utilities and give a clean appearance. Also provide safety for anybody if they were on the roof working. I saw some mention in here about the handicap parking. There's already existing handicap parking on the north side of the building. I own both of the handicap spaces on that building, on that side of the building, the only 2 on the property. So there's enough room to create the wide handicap van space with an aisle for, to pass through the space. You can see on the drawings that there were 2 parking spaces on the old building that were behind the original structure that was there, and those will no longer fit with town requirements when we build the new building. The new proposed building is 10 feet deeper into the parking lot than the original structure, but the same width. So we'll be utilizing the existing foundation and propose to go 10 feet deeper into the parking lot.
When you say deeper, you mean back towards the train tracks?
Back toward the tracks, yeah. Yep, I mean, it's right on a parking lot, so there's no vegetation or anything that'll be disturbed for the build. Any questions?
No.
Now that I know how it's supposed to go.
Well, no, mine's a pretty generic question. I'm new to the board, so when I first read that you were going to have 5 parking spaces on site, and you have 8 more up on Main Street, my first thought was, so 3 groups of tenants have to walk to Main Street to get their car. So my question, for clarification, is the fact that has 8 shared spaces elsewhere in town, he is then credited. He's able to offer those extra 3 up and in turn put them on site because he has that. Is that
So shared parking works that if you participate in the shared parking program, which most people downtown do, you get a lower parking requirement. Shared parking means that you don't restrict your spaces, so it says, Dominic's Apartments only. They're open for everybody to park there. The benefit of shared parking is you have to meet the requirement. You can meet it on-site, you can meet it off-site, you can meet a combination, but you're not going to have an assigned space. So his tenants can park there. They can park in any other shared parking lot in Freeport that they want. But he has to show that he meets the requirement, and he's doing that by showing X number on-site and X number under his ownership off-site. Everyone has to show that they're contributing to the greater good, but then we're all going to share and get along.
So what is
thank
the
you.
bottom line then? There's enough parking, 1 per apartment, in reality at the site, or
There's
not?
8.
The ideal with downtown housing, in this case, it's right next to the train station. We all hope that some people aren't going to have a car, some people aren't going to have multiple cars. Either way, if he does shared parking, which he has to figure this out, and he can do that, and he can change his mind at any time via parking recalculation. It's 0.75 spaces per unit,
So,
based upon the current
so
requirement.
let's say 6.
Yeah, so like 6. Yep.
So 6 are going to be available for,
He will have to show that he's meeting that. Some of them will be on site, some of them could be off site. That will be looked at as it goes forward. There was a number included in the application. It was based upon the old requirement because you remember that it just very recently changed.
but then there was a comment from, I don't know whether it was Nick or somebody, or about the train parking spaces that I guess the town owns those spaces?
The town has some spaces. I don't know if some of those spaces could be marked like no overnight parking, but there's a lot of others. I'm not sure. I'm just saying that. There's a lot of other spaces in town they could choose to park in. Or he could decide that he doesn't want to share and he could just say, for so-and-so residents only, and just meet it with the higher requirement. That can all be worked out as the process goes forward.
And we would be able to require that or not require that, or is that a town?
He needs to demonstrate that he meets it. It's up to him to show how he's doing that. He can meet it by shared parking or not shared parking. You can't require one over the other. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm asking because they said that the train parking spaces, they would appreciate leaving for train people.
I think that's a management of that parking lot. That would be a separate issue that would need to take up.
Okay.
Excuse me,
It's
but
not something we have purview over. It's another
Okay,
property.
so it's not our side of saying this is allowed or not allowed or required?
Right. Yes. Yep.
It's the town's property.
Yes. I believe most of that is the town's property.
Is it not our purview to impose conditions or restrictions as it relates to potential overflow uses of town property?
Not on municipal property. That comes under purview of council or Complete Streets. And he can't, unless it's coming under, he needs to demonstrate that he meets the parking under the shared parking requirements. Those are not entered into the shared lease parking
Yeah,
pool,
100%.
so yeah, he can't do that.
I think what I'm talking about is conditions or something that's contemplating how to ensure that there isn't the spillover, the inadvertent spillover, which is what was expressed as being a concern that might happen.
Yeah, so any applicant needs to show you that they meet the off-site. I think if there's an issue with how people are using that train station parking lot in general, that's more of a management issue of that site by the town, by the people that have the authority to do that, which is not this board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lynn?
Looking at Plan C2.1, am I correct on counting out 8 here?
There were 8 parking spaces. That was the old site plan.
No, the C2.1 is the new.
And the handicap over here.
Yeah.
It says 3 and 2.
I misunderstood it.
Oh, that's the boundary line.
Is this 2 on one side and 3 on the other? And then the,
Oh,
The
it says
handicap
3,
of the
but
two?
I'm counting, I'm a visual. I counted 5 on one side and 2 here.
Can you put the site plan up?
The site plan up? Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, that's why I could cancel. This is
Or do you have a site plan there?
Yeah, the gray lines
Look
might
at
be hard.
that.
I'll put it
flip the
up.
board.
Thank you.
Of course, we can't see them.
These are not.
Right.
These are.
If you could, just run through,
Pointing,
Yes, I can.
and
I can right now.
you're gonna need to
You
grab
need
a
the mic.
microphone, or one can stay at the mic and talk, and
This
one
one?
can go up and
This one's
point.
good? Yep. Nope. So if you're looking here, this is one space, this is another space. This gray right here shows the setback. Okay? Right, so then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parking spaces.
Okay. And the ones to the left are part of the railroad station.
The ones to the left are not part of the railroad station. None of this parking in this parking lot is part of the railroad station.
Turn it on.
Oh, is it not on?
Thank you. So, no, none of this parking in this lot is part of the railroad station. The railroad station parking lot, this crosswalk here, the railroad station parking lot is over on this side. So there's a shared entryway here, and you turn right to go into the railroad parking lot. You'll turn left to come into my parking lot. This right here, this is all part of a cross easement, and I share this parking lot with Alan Mooney, who owns the property right next door. So this parking over here, it's kind of a funny shape. My place is a little bit funny of a shape. It's kind of like a pot, you see, right? And so he owns all this down here. So this is all Alan's parking. And these are my spaces back here.
There's all like cross easements between the three parties going back there as it
Yes.
exists today.
We're learning a lot about parking.
That means I'm talking about parking twice a
We
month.
had to do that because of the old parking requirements. When I originally purchased the property in 2015, I needed 8 parking spaces to make this happen, just per those parking requirements. So you'll see on the old site plan that there were 2 parking spaces that were actually back behind the building, but they no longer fit with the new structure.
That looks like that's begging for a swap. Now, under the new rules, I mean, it seems like a basic swap will be better for both of you to kind of line up those properties a little bit.
Yeah. Could be said, yeah. Yes,
Is there street parking?
there is. Yeah, but there's street parking, but it's 1 hour or 2 hour parking or something like that.
A tenant couldn't put their car there for the night.
They could for the night. I don't think, I mean, there's, as far as I know, that there's no time limit, that the town doesn't ticket, on any kind of set time schedule. But, I mean, they could leave their car overnight. I've never seen someone get a ticket overnight. There's also a parking garage right across the street that's all shared parking as well.
The parking garage might say no parking overnight.
It does say that, but they're not allowed to.
Relevant for
They can't,
this.
they are part of the shared parking. They don't have the, I don't believe that the town gives you the right to dictate whether somebody parks overnight on your property if you're part of the shared parking. They might have a sign up there, but I don't think that that's within their rights.
Love. Overhead in the winter.
Oh, right, yeah.
Garage.
They'll probably love having a garage next door, right.
Either way, even, again, because we all play together, they can park wherever, on-street parking, they get us park however it's signed for the ordinance. He'd still have to demonstrate that he meets that off-street requirement, because it's an off-street parking requirement, can't be met with on-street spaces.
I'm just going to ask, can we move beyond parking?
I have a question or
Good.
two.
All right.
All right, question number 1, somewhat, it's not parking, but it has to do with your, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the existing building and the footprint of the new building, is that the same? I can't really judge by the plans, I'm trying to figure that out. Is it the same footprint, or is the new building bigger?
No, the new building is bigger.
Yeah, I assume that, but I couldn't really tell from
The new
here.
building is 10 feet further, 10 feet closer to the railroad tracks. So it utilizes the current foundation as it exists on the street side, but then when you go to the back, it's 10 feet closer to the railroad tracks.
Okay.
It's up on screen here, Linda, if that helps. This is the existing, you can see that.
Yeah,
width.
well, I mean, I'm looking at the plans, but it wasn't really marked the way I would have, what I was looking for. It didn't-
Getting some dimensions would be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. The other question I have is, and I don't know how the town deals with this, but you don't have any indication of the demolition of the building and where you're going to maintain the materials and any of that might protect any of the street or the sides or anything like that. Is there a demo plan that you would have, that you need to add, or should we ask for that? I don't know.
Yeah, let me look at that, because there is a requirement for what you're going to do for demo or land clearing. Let me see how that applies. It's a subdivision standard, how it applies to the existing building. That's a good point.
I will wait for the answer.
May I ask if, I may have missed it, are these proposed to be rentals?
They are proposed to be rentals.
I guess the question I'm left with is, in terms of the conceptual review of the site plan, is the building in the right place on the site? There aren't a lot of places where it could go, but I'm just curious if you looked at shifting it over, because you've got a little bit of latitude left and right on the plan. If there's some benefit to, consolidating the parking, say, for example, what process did you go through? And it sounds like the foundation of the existing building probably is part of where you landed, but just want to hear more about that.
Yeah, there's more than one reason. I guess right away, my first thought on it was, we've got an existing foundation, probably best off to utilize what is already existing instead of making new. It fit well with the previous parking, and the parking that exists on site with the current north and south ends of the building, it's already pretty, the building fits right in between the parking spaces, so any change to shifting it north or south would disrupt that and would be, additional planning that I feel would be a little unnecessary, especially given the small envelope that we already have on site for the footprint. It's kind of got to go within that area that it's in right now, give or take 5 feet on any side, but not the front, because it can't go any closer to the sidewalk.
Yeah, right, relative to the setback. Yeah.
And sorry, and just to wrap that up completely, as far as shifting it back further from Main Street, after review, you'll realize that you might start coming into a spot where you would violate your parking spaces on the back of the parking lot. You just wouldn't have enough room on the other side of the parking spaces for cars to pull in and pull out.
Right. I guess that begs the question of what happens with trash removal and other vehicular needs around the building.
The trash removal right now, we have a shared trash removal behind the alleyway of 5 Depot, the building next door. It hasn't been negotiated for the upcoming apartments, but my envisionment would be a daily service or a weekly service, depends on the needs of the building. There's lots of places that have a morning pickup from Casella. They'll come by and someone will wheel out the trash the night before. They'll pick the trash up in the morning and it's gone.
So I think it would be important to understand that circulation of the vehicles, and also what if there's any physical feature on the site, like a dumpster.
Right, like a dumpster out back. I have no plans for a dumpster out back of the building. I also think that a dumpster out back of the building, while being unsightly, would also would inhibit some of the parking spaces out back. That's why we put our dumpsters down behind 5 Depot Street, is because over the years, they kind of got in the way in the parking lot. People using the building next door or people using my restaurant, backing up and trying to turn around in the parking lot with the dumpster back there was tricky. So years, must have been at least 4 or 5 years ago that we moved all of our dumpsters, shared dumpsters, down behind the building with the alleyway.
So did you say then you would continue having that as usable refuse space?
I would continue doing it. I would have to, because we're doing apartments now, and we were doing a restaurant before, I mean, that's kind of a different things, would probably produce less trash with 8 apartments than we would with 1 restaurant. But I don't think that there'll be a problem storing a dumpster down behind the alleyway. But I also wouldn't be, it's also a little, it's a lot to ask somebody that lives in an apartment to take their trash down an alleyway and throw it in a dumpster. So I feel like, for this building, as it comes along, that there might be a daily or a biweekly service, or twice a week, excuse me, for them to come and pick up their residential trash.
So they need containers then?
Right. Like,
They need 2 per apartment?
I don't think they need,
Trash and recycling? I mean, that's how we,
right,
everyone that I know has that.
yeah.
So then those would have to be placed out front every day or out back every day?
Either out front or out back.
I think that's something that I'd like to see, exactly where the trash removal area would be, even though it's not a dumpster. It might be, I mean, if it was in the front, could be pretty unsightly to see, 16 containers in front of the building.
Sure. Well, a lot of apartments have shared refuse containers.
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying that I think I would like to see whatever your plan would be and where that would be situated.
Yeah.
That's
There's no
something-
apartment, right? No apartment, there's no elevator, correct?
There's no elevator.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, the trash is a subdivision standard based upon, this is a commercial use, so he would have to contract with a private waste hauler, but usually when they come back, they'll either note that they're going to store the trash inside, or if they're going to store it outside on a regular basis, they'd show that on the plan.
So I think you are right, though, about asking about that. So if we could get maybe a little bit more clarification on
Okay.
that.
There are quite a few multi-unit housing projects suddenly happening in town. And in terms of just balance, I'm curious to know whether you're planning on 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3-bedroom apartments, or a mix thereof?
I'm planning on 1-bedroom apartments.
Okay. So each person has half a floor? Each unit almost has, because you've got 3 floors.
Right. There'd be 3 units on the 2nd floor, 3 units on the 3rd floor, and 2 units on the 1st floor.
And the stairwell you said is in the middle at the entranceway?
That's right. The double doors.
Tenants will be
It's internal to the building though, right?
Correct. The double doors in the middle would be an internal staircase that would take you up to the apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And these entrances would be private entrances to the 1st floor units.
I've got nothing on site plan.
Okay. But we're also, can provide general comments.
Well, yep, the 3 things you need to comment are subdivision, site plan, and design review.
Based on the information that you have here today, because then he can come back with,
And you want to turn it to design review? I think my only observation on design review is and I'll told, obviously, we're going to come back later and use the kind of the final color scheme. Caveat, this is always a little awkward because it's entirely, it's a rather subjective standard that we kind of apply on a case-by-case basis. In past recent projects, there's been discussion about kind of, like, maybe perceived to be an aversion by the board about these street-facing patios or porches. That seems to be a very prominent feature of the front of the building here. Also knowing that it looks like all these units will have kind of side-facing, each unit will have access to a side-facing window and a rear-facing window. You can still provide that service without necessarily having the front-facing patios might be something to consider, because it just looks, kind of breaks up the, the facade of the building.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think that's my only meaningful comment about design review.
And we will need, it'd be real helpful once windows, doors, finishing is going to be certainly something you're
Right.
going to get a lot of feedback on.
Yeah.
And color as well, and material.
So I just want to remind you, if in the color overlay district by right, they can use any paint color from any paint manufacturer's historic color palette, and they have the right to do that. It's not something that the board has to approve. I know this is very conceptual, but because if you grant conceptual approval tonight, he could come back in and it would be requesting final approval. I think it's really important that you try to give him as much feedback on the conceptual building design, and knowing he needs details, but as shown, how it does or does not meet standards, so that he knows what he needs to tweak to bring back for you. Like, if you say, I don't like the windows, that's really not giving him constructive feedback to come back for final approval.
I would say.
I'm just using that as an
I would say,
example.
I couldn't give you, personally, I couldn't give you feedback on the windows with this level of detail that you have.
Okay.
Could you, you go, you're first.
Also, it would be very helpful if there were an elevation, a rendering showing, I don't know if there's room along the sidewalk to put some plantings or some greenery to soften the corners or whatever, but if you came back with a rendering so we could see actually how it's gonna look, because that brick is not gonna be that red.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's not red
All in all,
brick.
it's much more palatable if an artist could somehow, or whoever does that sort of thing, could give you an idea, give us an idea of what it might look like and whether there is any room for vegetation.
I put this one up here, Lynn. This shows existing vegetation. They didn't submit a landscaping plan showing any supplemental, but you can see that sidewalk does come up right up front to the building.
Yeah. But there can always be planters,
If it doesn't interfere with pedestrian
Right,
passage.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we may do planters. We did planters there for the last 17 years at Petrillo's. Yeah.
Good.
Jason?
I'm concerned about the way that the first story sets back and the second and third story overhang on the street side.
Yeah.
I just feel like it rhythmically, it doesn't feel right, and it's going to look top-heavy as a result of that and the material differentiation. And proportions that come out with the columns being kind of slender. I would encourage work on those 2 points of the ordinance, being proportion and rhythm of solid to void, and to try to, I don't know, make it feel a little more welcoming too, I guess, for, people who will be calling this their home, even though it's their apartment. So that approachability will be really important. And I guess if you think of a sort of traditional architectural language that would seem to be the norm, although I'm fine with some deviations, or dialogue about deviations. I feel like the sliders, especially the sliders everywhere, are going to be out of sync with something that feels sort of traditional and bound in the context of that place. So I think something more like double hung or casement would be a better fit. But
Yeah.
the back side of the building probably has more flexibility relative to that, if you want to loosen it up there. So those would be my comments.
Sure. I'll tell you, my thoughts with the overhang are more than one thought on it. First, I don't like to get rained on when I go into my house and I'm looking for my keys. I would like to be standing underneath some form of overhang. For the sliders, this is just conceptual, so this is not to say that there will be this many sliders, 10 street-facing sliders on the front of the building. But it's nice in the apartment to have something that you can open up and kind of feel outside, and have a way to open up that full slider and have, the air coming into your apartment. I think that's a nice feature for them. And
I assume it would be air-conditioned?
they might be, You might not want, you might want to use your air conditioner.
But
Yeah.
you'll have central, I mean.
I would propose air conditioning, yeah.
You have air conditioning.
I would, yeah, as an option, yeah. I mean, I'd be open to, I hear what you're saying, how you don't like all of the doors facing the street, and if that's something that has to change on it, then I'm fine with that. We can eliminate some of them or reduce the number of them to,
Well, I think that, the doors are fine in the sense that they're facing the street. I think that what would make it better is something that has more approachability to it in terms of the scale and some uniqueness and something more homey feeling. Right now, it just feels too rigid, I think, especially not only thinking of it from my architectural background, but also for the streetscape, which, I think Depot Street has some really interesting characteristics to it between the taller building and the building with the roofs and your building now, then this could really, play well into that. But, think about it in a much, stand back, and you've got the hose tower at the end. Just stand back from different vantage points and try to imagine the approachability and the feel of it relative to all the surrounding buildings. I think that there's just more, you could give more in and out there than just a sort of flat setback. And I think it's fine if there's a recess, but I think the full setback it's gonna give it a top heaviness that's going to feel awkward.
And I just want to throw this out to the board as well, is keep in mind that the train station is behind it. So we are looking at 360 around the building, from each perspective. And then the other thing that, since Ford is not here, is scale. It's the height, is you've got the parking garage right opposite. And it would be perhaps helpful to have a rendering of what it looks like from both directions on Depot Street relative to the garage opposite, because it could seem very much like a canyon. And so it'd be helpful if we could have a rendering, which we've asked for on a previous project.
You can ask, it's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement.
That we have, but, the burden of proof's on the applicant to show that it's compatible. The building height here is 3 stories up to 45 feet. I believe the parking structure might be closer to 45 feet in height. That's built under a different standard. One thing to clarify, design review is gonna be, this is Class C. It's really the parking garage, I would assume the building next door. There's a lot of Class C structures around here, maybe with the exception of the hose tower. Design review is required for any facades that are visible from any public right-of-way. I'm not sure if the rear facade actually is or not.
From the train station? Would that be considered a public right-of-way?
We really wouldn't consider any other public roads. I don't know, Jason, is your street right behind? No, you're not right behind
it's
here,
further
but you go
down.
that way a lot. Yeah, I'll do a drive-by
Okay.
on the visibility back there.
I have one question about the drawing, and can you explain what the white spaces are under each of the top floor balconies? The rectangle that's shown in white?
These rectangular spaces,
Yeah,
that's trim to break up the look of the building.
okay. Strange to me, but I am not the architect here, believe me, not at all. You're talking trim, so like, I thought they were like a concrete block or something, or where someone's putting an air conditioner window. It just looks strange to me, so I don't know how that fits with a design, when the design discussion happens, but it's just weird.
okay, thank you.
Let's see, I think we're kind of getting close to the end of this discussion with the information that we have right now
Can we just
for us.
kind of recap the building? So I heard you say, look at the setback on the first level, look at the columns. There's been a question flagged about so many sliding doors on the front facade, the white rectangle between the windows, for a lack of better terminology. if there's a way to better understand how this building would come into play with the height of the surrounding structures and the height requirement of the ordinance,
Size and scale.
size and scale. Do you have a width
Relative
and
to
height?
its surroundings. Oh, good luck.
I don't have a height.
Okay,
Yep.
width, okay.
Even bigger.
Yeah.
When you're mirroring. it's-
This is very conceptual, it's not,
Yep.
I mean, you're really early on in
Yeah,
drawings.
and I think also fixtures and finishings.
Fixtures and finishings.
Yep.
Yep,
And, you know, more detail on the trim
sure.
around, all the way around.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, or
As needed.
as needed.
Yeah, and then we'll also, where he's doing multifamily and there's different setbacks depending on materials, we'll want to make sure that his team conceptually speaks with the code officer or his design professional regarding code requirements and, you know, type of actual building
And
construction.
I think we also heard too, you know, if there's a way to incorporate plantings,
Yes.
something like that, I think we heard that as well.
Are those proposed to be wrought iron Juliet balconies?
The material is still to be determined, but
Because they look short if you've got a sliding glass door.
Right.
And a person walking out of it. they
Yeah.
could just-
sure.
Yeah, I just,
Well,
wanna-
if depending upon the final decision on the windows or sliders, any balcony would be fitted with a railing that met code.
Right.
Yeah,
And also to exterior lighting as well.
yeah.
So,
Details on exterior lighting.
so we're really talking just site agreeing on the site location at the moment, not the design and.
so the actual motion would just be on the subdivision and the conceptual layout. Once you grant that, he could really just come back for final approval. So when we talked about knowing that he was at the conceptual building phase, that would be really to his advantage to have something for you guys to give him feedback. So that's exactly what he is here for tonight. He knew you were gonna have a lot of thoughts, but he didn't want to come with nothing and then come back for final. So you have a very conceptual design. But if you took conceptual approval, I mean, you can come as much as you want, Dominic. We're never going to stop someone from coming in for like a midway checkpoint, or he could take the feedback you gave him tonight and come in and see if he could get final approval.
And, yeah.
Follow up. So final approval could take at least one meeting or maybe two or more, depending on how it's presented to us. We're not obligated to approve at the next meeting the rest of this.
You're not obligated to approve. I mean, the burden of proof's on the applicant to submit the required information to demonstrate that they meet the standards of the three ordinances.
With that said, I think it might be appropriate to have a site walk.
I'm not sure I would agree with that personally, because until I have a better idea of what the building actually would look like, I mean, I think we all,
So you're saying
we should all know.
premature
yeah,
for a
yeah,
site
yeah,
walk?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but then we're gonna get stuck time-wise, if we have the site walk after the next, after the next meeting, then there might
yeah.
be a lot more changes involved and.
Do usually do the site walk early on in the process to understand the site and how the proposal fits within the site. It's, sometimes they'll come back with a new rendering before the site walk. That's the other thing. I don't know where he's at in the development of these building renderings. But I'd hate, if you grant conceptual approval, they're gonna start doing engineering and stormwater and layout. So to then do a site walk, I feel like.
I would say if we did a
really be
site
good.
walk, one thing that would be real helpful for me in lieu of renderings is some idea of how high this is going to be relative to
Relative to the mall next
what
door.
else is there.
Right, right.
And I'm not sure how to do that. A tall pole on, tacked to the side of the building, the existing building or something.
Well, we need at least
Or
the dimensions.
Something, or some way to, say, on the other side of the building, the garage, this is how high it would be.
Right.
Something like
Compare,
that.
yeah,
That's
how high is this building compared to the garage next door?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, too. I mean, other sites you've looked at recently have been vacant. In this case, there is an existing structure there, so you could have that to relate the existing height of that structure to
Existing
get a
structure that's
good
going to be
feel
going
of.
away.
Do you have it
Yes.
at the tip of your tongue, the dimensions, the height of your existing restaurant building? So, I mean, just if we draw, I mean, you can't help it, but you drive by there all the time. So just to be able to, look and say, oh, that's a 30, foot-high building or a 20.
Right.
We're talking something that's double.
It's got to be 30 to 35 feet tall at the peak.
Let me check and see if we have.
It's over 2 full stories tall, because it was 2.5 stories.
So it could be just 25 possibly, but.
Could be.
I don't think we need to find that right now, do we?
Yeah, no, we don't have it. No, I thought we had it.
I mean, for this new building, we know it's 37 by, or it's 67. Yeah, 67 feet long, 35 feet deep, and, it's about 38 to 40 feet tall.
So what, do we need to, again, formally table this, pending on a site walk? Or do
Do we
we,
need to open it to public comment?
or would you like to, yeah, actually, or would you like to, schedule a site walk?
So
I'm open to what the board wants to do, if you want to schedule a site walk.
you do have public. I think if you want to schedule a site walk, I don't know if you're too cramped, but you have now potentially 2 site walks you want to do. We could try to do them on the same day.
It shouldn't take that long.
No?
No?
Better start at 8.
Actually, I would oppose a motion to do a site walk here. I think this is a prominent area that we know well. It's a fairly narrow space.
Okay.
It's a fairly small building. I personally don't believe it's necessary to recognize. That's just one opinion.
I would just, every other multi-family, multi-unit developments, we have done the sidewalks for.
Okay. So before we get into motions, because it sounds like we're getting close, is there any public comment? Okay, is there anybody online? Yes.
Nobody online.
Yes. And please identify yourself at the microphone.
My name's Peter Brown, Freeport resident. I'm curious whether this is part of the downtown Freeport Historic District.
It's in the design review district, but not on the National Register designated area that we have right in the heart of Main Street, if that answers your question. It is part of design review.
So it's not part of the historic district of downtown Freeport.
It is part of the design review district, which a lot of people refer to as the historic district of downtown Freeport, but there's a higher level of historic district.
Is there a need, that being the case, whatever that definition means?
Yeah.
Is there a need, and I wonder why there aren't any, questions about this having an old New England appearance? It's a box, sliding glass doors on the front. Does it have, or point out any similarity this has to any of the historically significant buildings and image that Freeport exercises and ordinances insist upon? Where are the New England antique or architectural New England features in that building? And I'm curious why you're not asking those questions. If this is outside of that district, it's next to the railroad track, so it doesn't matter? Or is it part of the district that is so significant to the retail and image of Freeport? Can't help but equate it on a smaller scale to the blasphemy that's happened in Falmouth just in the last year or two. So are there any New England architectural features here that could be incorporated? Because I see none.
Thank you.
And to the extent that there was a question presented, I think I would just only note that what's this is a multi-stage review process, and the design review about the features, the window design, the details, is something that's actually not before us to vote on today. We're voting on where it's located on the plan, if 8 units is the right number of units, those kind of standards. When it comes back for final review, that's when we kind of dig into the design of the building. So that will be a conversation we have, but, we're not getting into those details today because that's not what we're being asked to act on today.
But it's good feedback.
And that's, but that's a conversation that we're going to continue and try and, apply the requirements of the ordinance as best we can.
So it does sound like, based upon his comments, he is talking about the design review ordinance, which does apply, generally speaking, from Shaw's all the way up to Kendall Lane and then kind of back off Main Street.
I heard it said that it could come back for approval,
It's going to
Like-
come back. It's
like a
gonna-
box.
No, this is going to be updated with more detail and more information. Because at this stage, he doesn't even have to show us a picture of anything. He can just show us, here's where the building footprint's going to be.
Okay, would it be appropriate, because I don't know your function exactly, for you to be suggesting that it needs a New England character, and the next rendition should reflect that? But I haven't heard that all I've heard is that it sounds like if the windows were different and the railings were higher and there were some plants, this box would be okay. Maybe for approval next time. Is that
No.
true? No?
I think what you heard was that we need more detail, we need more plans, and I think you did hear some comment back specifically about the historical nature of what we're seeing. I'm not sure you heard that yet, but that certainly could be something, once we see more detail. I think, for me personally, it's a little hard to say that without the detail.
And I did mention the normative approach, which would be a traditional architecture. But as far as I can tell from the ordinance, it's not prescribed that it be, especially when it's not directly adjacent to historic properties, traditional or New England or some other definition of style.
Would that be the case more in this immediate area?
The same standards apply, but the standards apply in relation to the nearby A and B structures, which are the most important designated structures in Freeport. So the same standards apply, but it fluctuates a little bit based upon what's around you, because you want to be more compatible with those identified A and B.
The ordinance speaks about rhythm.
It does speak about rhythm.
And that's
yeah.
what you're referring to.
Yeah, I can tell you've read it. We like that. Yes, those 10 standards that you're envisioning, the height, the scale, the rhythm of solid to voids, the way it sits on the site, compatibility with nearby A and B structures, in making, they don't have, and what Jason's saying, you don't have to come in and replicate a historic structure, but you do need to show that it's compatible, especially if you do have some of those historic structures nearby. I think the most historic structure in closest proximity, and I'm winging it, is probably that E.B. Mallet office building, which is kind of that cute little brick building that's tucked into Freeport Village Station.
It's a ways away.
But yeah, at the end of the day, if the board would have to find that this application meets those 10 standards to take action on it.
My understanding is this is very, very conceptual in your plan. I mean, your location and your site is not as conceptual. It is, this is where you want to put it, and this is
Right.
what's there.
This is
But
the
drawing-
area where the building's going. This isn't the building, the exact building that's going to go there. That's not the proposal today.
Yeah, I mean, it helped us, but maybe it didn't help us, I mean, maybe it didn't
Well, I
help
think it
the
helped me.
perception.
It helped me understand what you were looking for in the next phase, once we determine where the building's supposed to go and if there's the appropriate amount of units in it. So, those two things are,
I don't think we're talking, I mean, For me, I didn't
those-
think we were talking about appropriate numbers of units. I didn't,
No, but he needs to determine that for his own project,
right,
what
right.
works for him.
I mean, that did
Yeah.
not come out of any of our discussion that I understood.
Is that part of subdivision review?
So just going back, are there any other? Oh, Caroline, are there any other people online for public comment?
No, they've hung out.
It's
They
only
have
quarter of
gone.
9.
I would just like to say I'm glad you got something out of this drawing, because I think you've gotten good feedback, including from this gentleman here, because, as you know, Freeport's trying to create a look and a feel, and we didn't get into those specifics because you're going to come back with pretty pictures showing how it complements the other buildings along Depot Street.
Yeah.
My preference is to do a site walk as soon as we can on this, before we take any action on this.
Including just the conceptual.
Yes. That's my preference, personal preference, but it's, I can't make a motion, so it's up to you.
I think you have two things. You have the site walk, and then you have the conceptual motion.
Conceptual
I mean,
motion.
you could do it all as one, but it might cause confusion.
When is our next
I don't
meeting?
understand what you just said. If you want to do a site walk, but you don't want to you would rather not get a motion for conceptual approval?
Correct, I'd rather table that and do a
Okay.
site walk first.
I just
That's
what
my
you said,
personal
I did-
preference, but it's up to you.
Fine.
I can't make a motion.
I would say, like, if you guys table a concept, is there additional information you feel like you need to make that determination? Or maybe it's just a site walk.
I think it's just a site
I just
walk.
pose it as a
No,
question so
it's,
you're
for
clear.
me, it's a site walk.
If it's just a site walk, then
It's-
we can simply say that we won't consider the next stage of the application until after the site walk has been completed. So at least that way, when we revisit this, we don't have to start this hearing over from the beginning.
Wouldn't you rather,
Go ahead.
I shouldn't say
No.
this the way I just said it. If we have a site walk without knowing, at least in front of us, what the official coming from you plan would be, because I'm assuming there'll be changes that you're going to make based on what you've heard from us. We don't really have an idea of what it's going to look like on the street any more than we do now. So wouldn't it be, I just feel like we should see something first before we go out there, because right now, we're going to see that red building, and we know what that looks like, and we know what the site configurations and constraints should be, just because they're kind of right in front of you. I mean, you can't really see the back unless we're walking around it. But I'm not sure what we would be doing with a site walk now without knowing what there is of a more specific building design.
I thought one of the things I heard you say is you want to understand the length and height of the proposed structure. I guess a question for the applicant could be, I know you envision some changes, this is conceptual. Do you, based upon feedback, don't answer this if you can, envision it still to be similar height in length as a flat roof? Just changing details, or are you?
You mean to the existing structure? Or
To the
this?
structure you have before you
To
tonight.
the structure yeah.
Heard on details, but do you still plan, are you looking at this point, general structure, shape, size, flat roof, will that remain unchanged, or is that still TBD?
It's my preference, is this general shape and size.
Okay.
So we'd be looking at something that's 38 to 40 feet tall.
That, Mr. Chairman, I might propose a compromise. That being that, I'd move that we approve the conceptual design, which is, of course, non-binding, non-fixed, subject to future submissions tonight, and move that we schedule a site plan or a site walk in the coming month, or at some point in time prior to the submission of the final package, and have the site walk done before we have a hearing on the final package.
And this is, I've got a, thank you, but a question. So are we, at this point, also giving the nod to the dimensions of the building? The footprint?
Yeah, I think you are. It's a very small
Yeah.
site, and so they're
Right.
showing you that.
And I would just
And
say,
that
I would still
can-
like to go out and given the
It's-
small footprint, I would like to see that marked out relative to what's there today.
It is conceptual. As with a big subdivision, you're always going to have some fluctuation once they take those conceptual drawings and do some of the engineering. But the general location and approximate dimensions
Yeah.
are going to remain unchanged. I would just, if you make a motion, it's just, I would add the word subdivision, conceptual subdivision.
But I'm one person, so,
Yep.
and that's perfectly fine.
Well, I just take issue with your saying we would be approving conceptual design, because
Oh,
designs.
excuse me, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
saying the conceptual
concept.
subdivision.
Right, perfect. I
review that
didn't
is-
want
that's
design.
Subject to, of course, yeah, we're giving, there's no design consideration that I'm suggesting be approved. Only the conceptual review of subdivision that's been presented to us
Right.
today for a motion.
Subdivision, I understand, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
this
good.
is no action on design
Right.
whatsoever.
On dimensions, it's subdivision. Okay. Yep.
The way it's written, if we do what's here, it includes site inventory map, site analysis, and conceptual plan, which is what's written
That's
on this,
what's- I-
suggested motion, so.
I'm going down and looking at that now.
Yeah.
And that's what I'd like to see first before.
You'd like to still do, you'd like to
Yes.
do the site walk
Yes.
before this gets
It's a
done.
tight space.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
So, it's up to one of you.
One of them.
So,
So one of you to make the next move.
Was that a formal
Yeah,
motion? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was a formal motion?
intended it to be.
But I believe you used the word
Could you say it
design.
again?
I tried
Here,
to
this has
I tried to
the finding
rephrase
you
it.
guys need to make. I don't know if you're
It's
looking.
getting late for all.
It is.
Right, yeah. So, I move that the board find that based upon the information submitted by the applicant, materials dated November 30, 2022, that the review of the site inventory map, site analysis, and conceptual plan for Charter Main Properties LLC for proposed multifamily dwelling residential subdivision proposed at 15 Depot Street is considered complete. That's the only standard that's necessary for preliminary review, that we're finding that the application's is
That it's complete and that they've shown the development in the appropriate areas, and if open space is required, that's in the appropriate areas. In this case, the open space is NA.
Oh, excuse me, I see. Which includes the finding that we're finding that the appropriate areas have been determined for development and no open space is required. Do I need to restate that? Because that was kind of broken up.
You read what it was, though, right? So it's.
Basically,
written.
yeah.
We don't have a secretary tonight.
No.
Don't worry about that, we have a way to get minutes done. I appreciate the rereading of the clear motion.
Is there a second?
Does the motion include the provision for the site walk, or are we handling that
And,
separately?
I would propose that, well, I want to make sure that we have a package. I offered it as a package, so I'll make sure with the package. I add to the motion that is,
Pending?
conditioned,
a site walk.
well, would include a site walk to occur prior to our subsequent review of the final application.
I would second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Wait, say discussion?
Discussion, thank you.
I just want
Thank
to
you, Linda.
clarify,
Yes.
and for your sake and
Yep.
through Caroline, that this has nothing to do with approving the fact that this is a building with 8 units in it, or what he's proposing right now is an 8-unit apartment. It has, what would approve has nothing to do with what is the size, the apartment size. I mean, because you said maybe it's too big a space, too small a space. If he had to change within this area and make it a smaller building, I mean, that's up to him at this point. Is that correct or
Is
not?
the building in the right general spot? You know the building is going to be an approximate size, and that's shown, and you know, even if it shrinks, you're approving it being in this general location. There's no land per dwelling unit, so if he wants to change the layout of that and put more units in that, he has the ability to do that. It would change other things on the site, but is the building in the right spot based upon the information they submitted? They don't show it in the middle of wetlands, they don't show it in the middle of steep slopes, things like that.
Right. If we were to approve this now, without knowing the height, are we approving what has been presented in terms of 65 feet long by whatever? Is that fixed once we approve this concept?
You're proving the conceptual layout that the building is generally in the right spot. He's shown you an approximation of what the building will most likely take up. If there's drastic changes, if he decides to cover the whole thing, an entire building, that would be a change from the conceptual plan, and we could say, okay, you need to go back to square one.
So is the building footprint about right? Is the footprint pretty much in the right
That's why we want the
place?
sidewalk.
Generally, but we were talking about generally speaking.
Right.
Right.
There aren't many options for a site this small.
And on this location, there's not a lot
Right.
of options.
Okay.
Okay, so you have a move by Jim.
So
and
is there a second? Jason seconded?
By Jason.
Okay. I'm just going to, just so you know, I'm going to vote against this because I still think a site walk would be prudent given the tight area, but let's go ahead and vote.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay. 3 yes. Those against?
Sidewalk.
Site walk. 2 opposed. It passes, so.
Okay. Well, when you go down for a site walk, let me know. I'm
Absolutely.
sure you guys will go down. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
And
So,
can
thanks.
you mark the four corners and?
Yeah, well, I'll mark the back too, because the other two are already sitting there, so you can't miss them.
With Dominic of what
They're right where the building sits right now.
to
Yeah,
mark.
but it just, having it, I mean, obviously, the building is there, but if it's a little expanded or the front is off.
No, the front's not going to change, so I would be spray painting the building. Yeah, so you can't miss it because it's the squared off 90-degree angles of the old building that sits there, but I'll mark the parking lot.
I want to clarify that site walks are open to the public. We will expect Dominic or a representative to be there on behalf of the applicant, but we do notify everyone within 500 feet so they can come just like they can come to a meeting. As far as dates, do you want to try to do it on the same day that we do the other one, or can people not accommodate to
I
back?
think it kind of depends on what day you come up with.
Okay.
Saturday morning, I think we can do a twofer.
Right.
I'm not
Tuesday
good
morning,
before
maybe
8,
not.
I'll tell you that. So,
Lunch, I think you need to talk with the other,
I'll coordinate with the applicant of when they
Yeah.
can be there,
and also the 2 members who aren't here.
understanding that the board would like to do this as soon as possible because we could have weather delays, snow cover, and a bunch of other things.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thanks so much.
Okay. Now we're on to item 5, review of the 2023 meeting schedule.
I have a draft of that. I haven't had a chance to finalize dates. So I will send that to you all. If you could let me know if you have any conflicts. Now, the January meeting is scheduled for January 18th, third Wednesday. I'm going to assume that there's no conflicts. But I'll put the schedule on the agenda next month, so if we do need to shuffle dates, we can decide that as a board.
Thank you. And item number 6, persons wishing to address the board on non-agenda items. And while many of us know who you are, if you could please identify yourself.
Not many of you know who I am. My name is Susan Nurse, and I live on the Pleasant Hill Road in Freeport. And I came here tonight for two reasons, and think I'm even more confused after having watched a review of a conceptual proposal, but I will give you the presentation that I had, and I know that you can't respond to me, or I understand that you can't because of the subject matter that I'm bringing up, but let me just say what I came to say, and then we can see what happens from there, okay? So I came for clarification and probably my edification of the Project Review Board's process and procedure for reviewing proposals, and to discuss gateways into Freeport and describe my stance on a proposed project in front of the board. I sent an email to you because I couldn't attend the public hearing at the previous Project Review Board in November concerning the property at 22 Main Street. And so I'm here to highlight that or magnify my points about that and to add some information that I think I learned, but I'm not sure. So I reviewed the minutes, and because of some of the comments that were made at that meeting, I'm a bit confused about the review process. During the meeting, there were lots of comments made about the downtown vision plan, even to the point of referencing sample building designs and styles. It's my understanding that the design review ordinance contains the guidelines that direct the way this board reviews a proposal in certain districts. I think I'm correct in thinking that the recently developed downtown vision plan has no standing with the Project Review Board. I think I'm right about that. Whether or not that vision plan exists, the guiding document for this board is the design review ordinance. So Freeport's downtown vision plan does suggest making changes to ordinances and the permitting process to make the development process quicker. Of course, any of these changes would be vetted and approved through a process that involves the town council, possibly with input from this board and the planning board. Last night, I put out a caution flag to the town council against making too many changes, too many significant changes to existing guidelines. The guidelines listed in the design review ordinance currently protect the quaint, historic look of Freeport. I am concerned that Freeport's New England Village Center would lose its distinct character, the one that residents and visitors enjoy, if the permitting process for development was streamlined and changes were made to such things as density, building height, and architectural standards. Again, I'll reference Falmouth, it was already brought up, but if you think about those new multi-story buildings built close to Route 1, the distinctive character of that area of Falmouth has been marred by these structures that are not visibly compatible with the surrounding area. Still, there have been no changes to the guidelines in Freeport, so that keeps your review within the parameters of the existing design review ordinance. I know I keep saying that, but just want to be sure that I'm getting this right. If my assessment of the design review ordinance is correct, there are a couple of places where references are made specific to new buildings, that they be designed and built in a manner compatible with the character of the district in terms of scale and visual effect. That's a quote from one portion of the ordinance. Designed and built in a manner compatible with the character of the district in terms of scale and visual effect. It must be the design guidelines under the Section 8, which I'm sure you have memorized, that are considered for each proposal, those 10 items. So just to keep me on course, the scale of the building, the height, proportion of the building's front facade, the rhythm of solids to voids in the front facades, proportion of an opening within the facility, the roof shape, the relationship of facade material, the rhythm of spaces to building on streets, site features, and sign requirements. I think I got them all. Many of the explanations of these design guidelines reference visual compatibility with its neighbors. So when you were discussing the Depot Street Square apartments, there was no mention of you mentioned them, but not in any kind of a, I guess I was looking for some kind of a review of each one of those items. Like you would talk about the first one, scale of the building, and give feedback to the applicant about the scale of the building. And then you'd move on to height, talk about that section, and then proportion of the building's front facade. And so kind of go through each one of those. But not on the board, I'm not trying to direct anything, I'm just asking, it seems kind of no set plan for how you reviewed an application. So that's why I'm more confused now than I was when I walked in the door. So I'll continue. Several goals and projects identified in the Downtown Vision Plan as priorities for the town conflict with the visual effect desired for Freeport's historic district of town, such as a Main Street redesign and placement of multifamily housing. I suggested to the town council that they proceed with great care in determining changes to town ordinances that impact our lovely New England village. And I suggest that this board proceed with great care in determining whether or not a proposed building fits within the scale and visual effect needed to maintain the look of this historic village, using the existing ordinance. So now let's get to the building in question. First, I want to talk about the gateway. The gateways to Freeport. On the north end of town, the Northern Gateway, some might call it, at Main and Mallet, sits McDonald's restaurant. We are very fortunate in Freeport to have a fast food restaurant that has design features that complement adjacent historic buildings. 40 years ago, the town of Freeport required McDonald's to modify its typical box-like appearance to fit within the existing character of buildings on Main Street. The approval process came with much angst. In those 40 years since McDonald's opened, Freeport has been praised and recognized for its determination to maintain the town's distinctive look. That McDonald's has been recognized as one of the most unique restaurants in the United States. People come to Freeport to have their picture taken in front of that building because it is so unique of a McDonald's. As you walk on Main Street, there are many examples of how, over the years, town leaders have maintained the architectural character of Freeport as the small village it is. The Southern Gateway, southern end of town, at Main and West Street, there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to shape that entrance for the town, much like the Northern Gateway. Currently, there's a proposal in front of the Design Review Board, your board, for 2 multi-story apartment buildings on the vacant lot at that intersection. I wrote to you before, as I mentioned, about the visual affront those buildings would have to anyone entering Freeport, traveling north over the railroad overpass. My concern has not waned. The proposed buildings are square and modern. There is nothing about them that fit within the neighborhood in scale, in height, in proportion, in rhythm, or roof shape. Nothing. I understand that certain parameters need to be met to make a building on this lot feasible. However, it is not the town's responsibility or this board's responsibility or the council's responsibility to fulfill the developer's wish to have a certain profitability. It is our responsibility, the people of Freeport, your board, that has the responsibility to have this building conform to the aesthetics established on Main Street. The people of Freeport count on our leaders, people who serve on the council, on the boards, on the committees, to make decisions that will improve the quality of our life here. Small decisions and large town-changing decisions. The property at the intersection of Main and West Street, the use for that plot of land has emerged as an important town-changing decision. Whatever goes on that lot will change forever the look of Freeport from that perspective as you drive north over the overpass. What will you see? I have been told that the decision about the use of the land at 22 Main Street is not up for consideration by the council. I've been told that the review of this project using the design review ordinance is solely in your hands. The town council has, however, had much influence about this plot of land in meetings with boards and committees and at social gatherings. I have asked the town council to direct their influence toward a use for this property that is compatible with the character of Freeport's downtown in scale and visual effect. I asked them to use their influence to create a warm and welcoming gateway into Freeport from the south, not a harsh, unattractive box blocking the view to this very building. You will not see this building if 2 apartment buildings go there. This will not be visible. And neither will the historic village. I know that you probably did a site walk. That seems to be something that's regularly done. And so hopefully you walked down and stood in front of the Sam's restaurant and looked up Main Street and visualized 2 3-story buildings on a hill, because you would be down in the low part of the road on a hill. So you're not just looking at a 3-story building, but you're looking at a grade increase of probably another story. So effectively 4 stories from where you stand if you're in front of Sam's. For some reason, there seems to be a rush to get multifamily housing projects approved in the downtown district. Perhaps this urgency is driven by a desire to fulfill components of the downtown vision plan. I would agree that the infrastructure in the downtown area supports that type of housing. I think the location for the Depot Square apartments is great, but the design of that is horrendous. It doesn't look at all like a New England building. Nothing that would make me seem, oh, this is a lovely New England village with a beautiful apartment on Depot Street. Nothing about that. I would agree that the infrastructure in the downtown area supports apartment housing. I would not agree that the proposed housing needs to be situated on Main Street, like the proposal at 22 Main. I would not agree that this particularly proposed building fits any of the required design components that form our downtown village. None of them. The townspeople will look to you, this board, for whatever change happens at 22 Main Street. Very few people pay close attention to the day-to-day happenings in town government. I was at the council meeting last night. There were probably the same amount of people either on the Zoom meeting, on the phone, or in the building. Very few people pay attention to the day-to-day governmental actions. They do pay attention when something impacts their town in a big way, especially in a big visual way. And this group of proposed buildings at 22 Main Street is a big visual atrocity. The gateway into Freeport for residents and visitors alike sets the stage for their view of the town as they proceed north. The successful McDonald's project was worth the effort to form the northern gateway. Let's put forth the effort to make the southern gateway pleasing to the eye for residents and visitors alike for the next 40 years and beyond. Thank you for your service to the town. Thank you for listening to what I had to say tonight. I appreciate your time. And I truly hope that you will make decisions based on the regulations that are before you and see that these regulations are really there to protect the quaint New England village that we have, and that people in Freeport, whether they're visitors or residents, want to keep. We want to be unique. We don't want to look like every other town. And we're going to if we keep getting proposals that show us a box with no features that complement what is around the neighboring buildings. So, thank you again for your time, for your service, and for listening.
Thank you very much. Are there any other folks? Caroline?
None on Zoom.
Okay.
I second. Her opinion.
Go to the podium.
With,
Yeah, come to the podium.
with that in mind, is there a motion to adjourn?
Before we close up, can I raise just an issue that maybe to plant a seed for the future? I think tonight, we apparently had at least one person that was on and interested in participating in the meeting, and by the time we got to public comment, the person was gone. I think I'm generally concerned about our procedural order that causes people, we're bound, we're going to be here through the end of the meeting. If we want people to be engaged and participate in the process, I think it would be great if we could make it a little bit easier on them. And I'd encourage that in the coming months that we might consider a procedural structure that would allow us to open to the public discussion of an agenda item early in that review. We can open it up, we can hear the presentation, we can allow public comment, and then go to our questions, which can sometimes be extended to both, one, give people the opportunity to say their piece and go home, and two, also so we might reap the benefit of those comments and not suggest that our minds are already made up before we hear that view. Again, that's not something that's before us tonight, but I just want to plant that seed that I think that procedural rule might be in our benefit going forward.
I can address that, if you don't mind. I actually talked to Guy about it after the last meeting. We have a rules of order and procedure of the project review board, which you all have in your binders. We had looked at potentially making some updates to that, and then we never went forward. So we talked about putting that back on the agenda so you guys could look at it, but we wanted to wait till we had a full board and we knew we were short for tonight. So I think that might be a good way to get the conversation started, look and see what we have on paper and see if there's tweaks that the board wants to make. Process for that is you'd make tweaks, would get any legal review for procedure. If you voted to make changes, we go to council, they put it on a consent agenda, and if they approve it, it's.
Aren't our procedures independently dictated?
You have, so you have like application procedures are dictated by the ordinance, but then you have like a rule of order, like if you want to submit public comments, submit it by this date, or what do you do if you don't have a quorum, or what do you do if your chairperson's not here? So you have that second rules of order.
But then there's actually a third rules of order, which is this much more informal, the way that this body intends on conducting its meetings, which is not bound by ordinance, it's basically bound by our practice and, the policies that we
And we could,
establish
I think
for
we could look
ourselves.
at putting something in the rules of order too, if it needed it.
Could I ask you a question to clarify? Are you talking about per application having public comment before our comment, or as a general evening on an agenda, having an item 2, say, public comment on items on the agenda in general terms, or you want the applicant to start and let the public answer before we answer? I didn't know which way you're thinking.
What I'm contemplating is that as each agenda item comes up, that we would give the applicant the opportunity to, say their piece, express the basis of their application, and then provide, immediately provide the community, the public, the chance to chime in, and after which they can leave if they'd like, or they can continue to be part of the meeting, and we can.
So it's agenda, it's item per item,
Correct.
application per application
Correct.
that you're asking,
To
not.
help kind of keep us
I'm
organized.
just going to suggest, because we do have 2 board members, including the chair, who aren't present for this discussion, and I think that's very important for them to be part of that. So I'm
Yeah,
going to
I'm just
suggest,
clarifying
think
what you were
about
saying.
it, continue it, because I think this is, again, good discussion to have.
And to be clear, I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting any action tonight. I'm
Yeah.
not,
Right.
I'm merely
Right.
saying that I think
So I
that
just-
this is something that we
Right.
should take action.
So I
on.
would just like to push this discussion,
Yeah, I'll make a note to put
kick
that
the
on
can.
We've had a lot of
To the other
conversation
chair.
about kicking the can.
You don't want to do it.
I would just like I think there's value in, if someone wishes to speak to an item, hearing first what the members of the board are saying, because if the members of the board are saying, we've got a problem with this, then we've taken the buck off them by doing our job. And they can then speak either in support or whatever, but I think hearing from the board first makes sense on an individual item, and then have the public. Another compromise in my thinking is that the first two items on the agenda tonight, or maybe the first three, were sort of housekeeping. The sign for American Eagle or whatever. Those items that we can discern may not have a lot of interest to the general public could be the business items at the end. But the items like building a new multi-unit building in town, one would think there would be public interest. And so push that earlier in the agenda so people don't have to stay up all night and hang
I'm
up.
just going to suggest that we,
Stop talking.
This next.
because I think it's really important we have this discussion with a full board.
I'm with you.
Okay.
It's just I'll
Again,
forget
the chair
next
is
time.
not here.
It's now on record, though. so-
Yes.
And
That's
some of
why I have
that
to get
is
it
in
So-
the rules of order, the way we do it.
Okay. So is there a motion
So moved.
to adjourn? Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of adjourning?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Unanimous.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just don't want to be tasked
Recording stopped.
as having the longest meeting this year. When I'm
This is